Welcome to the Fantasy Fangirls Podcast, where two sisters dive deep into beloved fantasy lore, characters, themes, theories, and more.
I'm Lexi.
And I'm Nicole.
And today we are so excited to be covering chapters 22 through 28 of A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. Maas. As always, let's start with our content warnings. While we're focusing today's discussion on this stretch of chapters and ACOWAR, all of these episodes include spoilers for the entire ACOTAR series. These deep dives do not, however, have spoilers for the rest of Sarah J. Maas's series, except at the end of every episode where we include our Maasverse Madness segment. And today's is actually quite long.
Yes.
And you can just expect them to be pretty long moving forward with the series because we're getting into the real lore here with the crossovers and it's so much fun. Anyway, we will give a big spoiler warning beforehand so you can leave the episode if you haven't read the Maasverse, or you can keep listening for Throne of Glass and /or Crescent City callouts.
So with all of that said, it is a prison episode, which means it is lore galore, and it almost ended Lexi this week. So please, if you have not finished the ACOTAR series, go read it and then come back. Honestly, it's just going to make a lot more sense.
Next, we of Fantasy Fangirls are adults who say adult things about adult books. In other words, friends, this podcast is rated R.
Elaine and Lucian, they are alone this episode, and it's not rated R, but our cursing will be, so please be mindful of little listening ears.
Additionally, we have so many live events coming up, including a few new ones to announce right now, so listen closely.
We are jumping out of our seats because we finally get to share that we are hosting a Fantasy Fangirls live show at Comedy Works in Denver, Colorado on October 20th. Y'all, this has been so long in the making. We're so excited.
We will also be featured guests at the Dragon Gauntlet in Boyne City, Michigan this August 16th and 17th. Ticket sales close on August 2nd, so be sure to get yours before it's too late. And another new announcement, we will be attending Swords and Shadows Masquerade by Mountains and Magic in Highlands Ranch, Colorado on November 23rd this year.
You will also be able to dance the night away with us at the Fantastique Collection's New Year's Eve drop party in Denver, Colorado. I'm so excited.
Me too. The Fantasy Fanboys are coming with us. It's going to be so much fun. And we also have so much more in store as podcast partners at Romantasy BookCon in Los Angeles on February 20th through 22nd, 2025.
This is a lot of information, so you can find the links to each and every one of these events in the show notes.
And lastly, if you love Fantasy Fangirls and have been loving this ACOTAR series journey we're on together, if you want more content, more community, more events, and just more all around, please check out our Patreon.
We have 3 membership tiers that you can join. The Valkyries, which includes access to our Boppin' Discord, live Q&As from Lexi and I, community events, book club, promo codes for live events like the plethora we just listed off a second ago, plus a 20% off discounted and exclusive merch store that is all for $5 a month. Or you can join the High Fae, which includes everything from the Valkyrie level, plus early access to ad-free episodes, our full episode outlines, and special voting privileges. That's for $10 a month. And our newest tier, the Inner Circle, which includes everything from the previous 2 levels, plus a welcome gift, a shout out on an episode, and lots of behind the scenes content from Lexi and I, and that is for $25 a month.
Join the party at patreon.com/fantasyfangirls. The link is also in the show notes, and really and truly, thank you so much for supporting us as we've turned this podcast into our livelihood. The reason that we even brought on a 3rd tier is because so many of you have asked how else you can support us, and I'm going to start crying here even before the episode fully starts. Like, just thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We are an independent podcast, and this is a dream come true, and you are putting a roof over our heads, and we appreciate it so, so much.
And now it is time to learn about the Bone Carver's family tree.
As always, Nicole's going to get us started with this ACOWAR deep dive by summarizing what happens in chapters 22 through 28. So gather around, friends. We need an Inner Circle debrief.
Chapter 22, Prison Time! Cassian and Feyre are winnowed to the prison by Rhys, and upon entering, Feyre notices something about the Bone Carver. He looks a lot like her and Rhysand put together. Offering the Bone Carver an Adder Bartok bone, the small child starts to taunt Cassian about Nesta, who, yes, he's heard of through the rumor mill. She's a popular one, Chapter 22. Feyre asks him about joining their cause, and he's like, nah, because my siblings scare me, so I'd rather stay in this prison cell. Yikes, my sister just threatened to tell mom on me. Who are these siblings, you ask? The Weaver, aka Striga, and some dude across the sea named Kostjay. But some long ago Fae warrior contained them to their time out spots, and that Fae warrior blood runs through some human line, which I've devoted so much of my brain energy to try to figure out this week. Oh, but it looks like one thing will bring the Bone Carver to their aid if Feyre brings him a mirror called the Ouroboros. Good thing they're going to the Court of Nightmares later today where the mirror resides. So the deal is struck. Bring the mirror and he will fight on their side. While waiting for their Rhys Winnow Uber, Cassian and Feyre talk about Nesta and her powers of death, which Cassian tells her he will never be afraid of her sister. Lexi melts. Chapter 24. Back in Velaris, Feyre visits those sisters, and look who's out of her room. Go Elaine! But she's now talking in nonsense half riddles. Feyre and Nesta leave Elaine to go talk next steps about their middle sister. And who walks into the room with Elaine but her mate, Lucian? Breaking the rules, you naughty boy. Feyre, using her Daemati powers, enters his head and watches him try to talk to his mate. Elaine starts off by asking who he is. Not a great start, my guy. Oh, but she can also hear his heart beating through the walls while he's sleeping. Okay, Elaine, and yes, we will be talking about it. Exiting his mind and entering the room, Feyre decides to move her sisters and Lucian to the townhouse, starting now. Down in their new residence, Elaine and Asriel go to the garden as Feyre and Rhys get ready for their Court of Nightmares visit. And Snoopy Feyre, shocking, watches Asriel and Elaine through her window and asks Rhys why the Cauldron didn't make them mates. Way to take a shipping side, Feyre. But Rhys tells her that a mating bond can be rejected and to please not meddle in their business. Save your breath, Rhysand. Chapter 25. It's the second field trip of the day to the Court of Nightmares. After a quick display of power on one throne that is not the same as a throne scene we got last book, the Inner Circle goes to meet with Keir about bringing his Darkbringer Legion to their aid in the war. But save your breath again, Rhysand, because Keir expected this and can sympathize with Hybern's cause. Great dude, Keir. But Rhys has something that Keir might want, and in walks Eris, eldest son of the High Lord of the Autumn Court, and a real head scratcher for this fandom. Chapter 26. Who is not happy about this Aragorn level entrance? More. Who is pissed, hurt, betrayed, and about a million other emotions towards Rhys for orchestrating all of this behind her and everyone's back. Turns out that Eris is willing to offer Keir an alliance in exchange for his help in the war. But Keir's like, that's a start. He wants out of the mountain and into Velaris. Rhys agrees with conditions and restrictions, burying himself into a deeper hole. Feyre tells Keir that she is in need of the Ouroboros mirror, and he laughs. Good fucking luck, Feyre, darling. It's yours, if you can take it. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the maddest of them all? More turns to Eris, and they have an exchange that deeply puzzles us, ending with Eris admitting that he had nothing to do with Lucian's lover's death, and he got word to Tamlin to come and get Lucian. Head scratcher. Chapter 27. Things aren't looking good for this Inner Circle, folks. Mor is pissed. Cassian is pissed. Amren is Tiny Ancient One putting Rhys in his place pissed, which guilty Rhys tells him that he's taken precautions to ensure the city will not be a pleasant one for Keir to visit. Things simmer down, but Amren learns that Feyre and Cassian went to the prison to try to get the Bone Carver on their side. Reluctantly, she shares the story of how she entered the prison and how she walked out many years later. But that will have to be tabled for now because Elaine comes downstairs sharing how she hears her crying and everyone thinks this her is dead. We're just gonna brush over that horror show for a moment. The sisters agree that it is time for Elaine to see a healer. Later that night, guilty Rhys talks to Feyre about his regrets with making Mor sad, and he admits that yes, it was a bad call. Rhys, I love you, but yeah, it was. Chapter 28. A different Tiny Ancient One, Maja, comes to see Elaine, but can find nothing wrong with her. You know who might be able to sense something wrong with her? Her mate! So it's a date. Elaine, Lucian, and their chaperones, Mor and Feyre, set up for tea. Dun dun dun! You know, all of this talks of healers gets me thinking, if a healer checked me out, they would probably be like, you could be a lot better about your hydration, Nicole. Healthy hydration is not just about drinking water, it's about drinking water and electrolytes. But most of us only worry about the water when trying to stay hydrated.
The solution obviously isn't to stop drinking water, though. It's to drink water plus electrolytes. Enter LMNT. LMNT is an electrolyte solution that has enough sodium, potassium, and magnesium to get you feeling and performing your very best. Plus, my favorite part about it is that it has zero sugar, artificial flavors, or other dodgy ingredients to hold you back.
My favorite part of LMNT is the plethora of flavors that they have. I love going through my variety pack and like trying a new one each day. It's always so fun. Today, I am drinking watermelon salt because it's just my favorite. I love watermelon salt and mango chili.
What about your mango chili? That's always your favorite.
Mango chili and watermelon salt are my favorites, but like I can't like go too far into what, like they have to be equals. They're equal.
Yes.
Mine. But I love it. It feels like I'm always treating myself whenever I'm getting my daily element, except this treat is good for me and my hydration.
LMNT came up with a fantastic offer for us. Get your free sample pack with any LMNT purchase at drinklmnt.com/FFG. Be sure to try the new LMNT Sparkling. It's a bold 16-ounce can of sparkling electrolyte water that's perfect for on the go this summer. It's time to step into the cauldron and discuss key insights, character analysis, foreshadowing, theories, and oh, so much more. And I'm going to just say emphasis on the theories part of that today. Oh my goodness. But first, who wants to go back to the prison? I'm honestly still recovering from the last time we covered the prison in ACOWAR episode 4, but at least now we've got the foundation. So today we build on that, which by the way, that Suriel topic is its own YouTube video. If you need a refresher, link is in the show notes. Rhys, being the mother hen that he is, reminds Fae-vorite that she won't be able to reach him via their bond while in the prison, thanks to the wards and spells far older than Prythian that are there. As they're walking up to the prison, Cassian gives us a fascinating download on the Bone Carver and Old Gods. First, he warns Fae-vorite that she should focus on finding a way to control the Bone Carver in this world, italics on the this world. If they help him open up the tear to his own world so he can return, they may be fighting far worse enemies than the King of Hybern. Basically, they could invite otherworldly monsters to Prythian and then they'd really be dead. This is so delicious thinking of the bigger Maasverse. Second, Cassian explains that way more than 15,000 years ago, there was life here at the prison before the High Lords took Prythian. The old gods ruled this land and the ancient Fae worshipped them. Then the magic shifted to the High Fae, who brought the Cauldron and mother deities. Over time, most people forgot about worshiping these old gods as they adopted these other deities. This leaves us with some inconsistencies because the Bone Carver did say in ACOWAR, quote, long ago, before the High Fae, before man, there was a cauldron. They say all the magic was contained inside it, that the world was born in it. But Cassian says here, as they're walking to the prison, quote, there was life here before the High Lords took Prythian. Old gods, we call them. They ruled the forests and the rivers and the mountains. Some were those things. Then the magic shifted to the High Fae, who brought the Cauldron and mother along with them. And though the old gods were still worshipped by a select few, most people forgot them. So that leaves us with the question of what came first, this world where the old gods lived and the ancient Fae who worshipped them, or the Cauldron, which created the world, and we know for a fact that the world is bound to it. Is there possibly a way that both of these could exist? I'm personally going to chalk this inconsistency up to history being different depending on who tells it. Origin legends are passed down among the generations and are going to differ, going to have gaps that we simply just don't know. At least that's what I'm telling myself as I follow down the ACOWAR rabbit hole because these inconsistencies can drive me crazy, but really does make sense with, history and the generations and who's telling it. Anyway, I'm wondering how or if the old gods are connected to the Daglin. Like they're not as powerful, but they are of the same essence as the Daglin. They are all from another realm or other realms plural and are extremely powerful. Rhys will tell us that the Daglin were the first masters of this world. An old legend says that they were near gods and monsters who created the Fae and humans. That's not entirely true, as we will learn, but I'm not going to get into Maasverse spoilers territory with that. Daglin drank magic like fine wine. It was their source of food, essentially. So this could equate to them feeding off life sources like these death gods. The Daglin were defeated by Fionn and his cauldron-made great sword Quaidian, but then he was betrayed by his queen. And it's possible that this ancient Fae female warrior who contained the Bone Carver's siblings is Fionn's queen who helped him defeat the Daglin. Lanthus might also be considered a death god because he supposedly cannot be killed like Koschei, who is the master of his own death. And we know Lanthus participated in the wild hunt, which the Daglin would, quote, gather a host of their fiercest, most merciless warriors and grant them free reign to kill as they pleased. And Lanthus says, quote, Fae and beast bowed before us. So maybe Lanthus and these death gods weren't the almighty Daglin, but there are heavy connections that make them like the Daglin's minions, or they are their fiercest, most merciless warriors. So I know that's a whole lot, but it's so fascinating to think about all of those connections.
I've completely forgotten about the Wild Hunt part of the story. Like, that was just such a small little insert in Silver Flames that it's like, whenever I think of the Wild Hunt, my mind immediately goes to The Witcher. But I do want to build off of this for a second, because I love the idea that the Bone Carver, his siblings, are Daglin, or I'm going to say like Daglin step downs, basically. Yeah. But also, I wonder, the Bone Carver specifically, if he's, I'm going to call it a good Daglin, because back in ACOWAR, he explains how the Cauldron fell into terrible hands, aka the Daglin. And when Rhys asks where they hid the Cauldron, the Bone Carver says, quote, "Tell me one of your secrets and I'll tell you mine." Meaning that he was probably one of, if not the only person who hid the Cauldron away. So did he betray his fellow Daglin, or again, Daglin adjacent, and hid the Cauldron away for them, making it possible for Fionn and his Fae warrior to contain said Daglin? That's unfortunately all I can say right now that we're not in Maasverse Madness this episode.
Knowing how early the Bone Carver went into the prison, I don't know. I think that's a fun theory.
Keep going.
It's been a while since I said that.
I know, it really has. I missed it.
Let's get back to Cassian's download about the Bone Carver specifically, because legend says that he is one of these old gods and that he is able to annihilate hundreds of soldiers with one breath, which may be useful, say, on a battlefield. Hence why Feyre and Cassian are going to meet the Bone Carver right now. They know they don't have the numbers to defeat Hybern, but if they can get the monsters to fight on their side, they'll stand more of a chance because of how deadly the Bone Carver is. But they will need to ensure he is bound to obey them within an inch of his life, which would happen through a bargain bond, so he isn't unleashed upon the whole world and cause all-out destruction and death. Just to their enemies, you hear, Bone Carver? In this moment, Cassian states that no one knows how he ended up in the prison, but luckily, the Bone Carver will tell us soon enough, or at least give us a high-level version of it. They don't know how they'll free him from the prison yet, because once an inmate is in prison there is no way for them to ever get out. But luckily, our crew knows the one person who has escaped, which we will get into when she shares that later in this episode. When Feyre and Cassian enter the Bone Carver's cell, Cassian is clearly shook by whatever image the Bone Carver is to him. We never learn who or what he sees, but considering how pale he is and his growls and snarls, it is clearly meant to be unsettling. There is, of course, the theory that the Bone Carver appears as someone who plays a part in your death or someone who dies. I'm more inclined to think the Bone Carver appears as one of these three possibilities: Cassian's mother, Nesta, or one of his nightmares in corporeal form, similar to what he saw when he faced Bryaxis. Or maybe it's Lanthus, who is the scariest creature he's faced and who is also in the prison. While we might be wondering what Cassian sees, we do get confirmation of exactly who Feyre sees in the Bone Carver. Same as the last time she visited him months ago, but now she recognizes the little boy.
Dark-haired, with eyes so crushing blue they appear almost violet, and her father's mouth. Quote, "The High Lord's son, my son, our son." This is such a chills moment from SJM.
We cannot be positive, but I am heavily leaning toward it being Nyx. Now, he doesn't have wings like Nyx will when he's born, but since Rhys can make his wings disappear as half Illyrian, I'm inclined to think Nyx will also have this ability.
I'm also leaning this way. Another option is that the Bone Carver is appearing as a different child of theirs, maybe like a second child. But assuming now that since Feyre has Illyrian internal womb anatomy, she is going to conceive winged babies going forward. Or like she could conceive a baby without wings and just pop it out with an Illyrian womb. I don't know how it works. I'm not a fantasy doctor. So technically, if that is the case, the same argument would still stand. If the second kid is conceived when she's Illyrian, because she has an Illyrian anatomy, it would still have wings, meaning this would not be a second child. However, like you mentioned, there is the theory that the Bone Carver shows up as a person who plays a part in your death. Technically, Feyre did die in childbirth and Nesta brought her back to life. So appearing as Nyx would still align with that theory. Seeing him as her son is more meaningful than just seeing her and Reese's future, melded together in a kid. Romantic, right? I know. By realizing that this boy is indeed her son, or at least the son she would have if they survived the war, seeing him also starts to change her mind about whether or not she wants kids. Quote, my son's face, the vision of the future that had once been shown to me all those months ago, as some sort of taunt or embodiment of what I hadn't dared yet admit to myself, what I was most uncertain of. And now that young boy, a different sort of taunt for the future I stood to lose. She previously was uncertain if she ever wanted to bear children, and now the bone carver is showing up as the embodiment of this future she stands to lose. We've discussed how A Court of Frost and Starlight is really the turning point for Feyre wanting to share that future with Rhys with children, but here SJM is really starting to plant the seeds much earlier than ACOWAR. The bone carver, however, has heard rather interesting things about this female named Nesta Archeron. The rock, darkness, and the sea whispered to him about how the earth shuddered in fear that day in Highburn. Quote, how they trembled when she emerged. She took something precious. And Cassian immediately goes white as a sheet. But the bone carver's like, no, I'm not done. Quote, how lovely she is, new as a fawn and yet ancient as the sea. How she calls to you, a queen, as my sister once was, terrible and proud, beautiful as a winter sunrise. Wow, we need to talk about this. All right, first off, the fawn symbolism is really here on the page as innocence, potential new beginnings, all of that kind of stuff. Sounds about right, given how much deer and fawn language has shown up in this series so far in really pivotal moments. Quote, and yet as ancient as the sea. This could be referring to her being part of the Cauldron, who is, as ancient as all get out, considering it made the sea. Or it could be referring to her firepower, which fire and water are both elements. So ancient, elements, that could be kind of the tie-in there. Then the bone carver says how she calls to you. Huge mating bond hint for him and for Cassian and Nesta. Then goes on, quote, a queen as my sister once was. Oh, God. The queen language we're super used to around Nesta. And this is not the last one we're going to get in this chapter stretch even. But the as my sister once was is nerve-wracking considering his sister is an old god. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to table that for now. Quote, terrible and proud. Pretty self-explanatory when it comes to Nesta, but the bone carver ends with, quote, beautiful as a winter sunrise. This is just so Nesta right here. She is beautiful, absolutely stunning, devastatingly beautiful, if you will, from last episode. But she is also icy as that winter sunrise. But okay, let's go back to this as my sister once was an ancient language, because that really stood out to me. The bone carver said earlier, quote, what did you wake that day in Highburn, Prince of Bastards? Did Nesta become a death god, or at least part death god or part old death god, since considering her power is literally death? Or is this just a really big, she's powerful, folks, from the bone carver?
I think it's not quite so black and white, but if I had to call it black and white, then yes, we know that the Cauldron was corrupted by the Daglin. They turned it into a weapon of destruction instead of a creation of life. So I think that Nesta took some of that corrupted power, but Cauldron made objects counter the Daglin. So it's like she is literally both that destruction and life, and it's all rolled into that power. And that's why her power is so fascinating, because it's like that yin and yang. Going back to the quote about what they woke that day in Highburn, Nesta emerged from the Cauldron and changes the playing field with her Cauldron made and Daglin corrupted power. Because I don't feel like he's talking about the Book of Breathings waking anything like Amren warned when, the two halves of the book go together. I really do think that Nesta emerges and she is something both new and ancient, exactly like he's saying here, both new being like this new power that nobody has ever seen before, and ancient because she does call forth those death god powers.
We know that Fionn wielded Gwydion, who is a Cauldron-made weapon, in order to do bad things to the Daglin. So would we equate Nesta almost with Gwydion? As she is like a Cauldron-made weapon?
Yes, that's that part of both the good and I'll say the defensiveness of being, she's both the essence of the Daglin and she is also the essence that counters the Daglin.
Dope.
And again, I'm only saying that she is part essence of the Daglin because they put their own corrupted powers into the Cauldron. So the Cauldron became something that is not so much life and creation and I'll say happiness, and it became more of this destruction and negative thing. And so she embodies both of the Cauldron's elements.
Because she took that power from the Cauldron when she went in. Oh, yes. That's a head scratcher. I like this. After leaving the prison, Fae-vorite and Cassian get some time to debrief about this wild download from the Bone Carver. And Cassian admits that one of the reasons he came to the prison in the first place was to find out if the Bone Carver knows what Nesta is, or at least what her powers could possibly be.
And from his perspective, he wanted to learn about her powers so that he could help her. That's his main motivator here.
Feyre, being concerned for her sister, asks if Nesta's powers are indeed death. Would Cassian be afraid of Nesta? Unspoken, would the power of death be a deal breaker for you, my guy? After being quiet for a long time, Cassian says, quote, "I am a warrior. I've walked beside death my entire life. I would be more afraid for her to have that power, but not afraid of her. Nothing about Nesta could frighten me." Oh, swoon! I love it. Big mate tint, obviously. But this does bring up a theory. There is a theory that Cassian's mate is not necessarily Nesta, but it's actually death itself. And he mated with Nesta because of her powers of death. Personally, I'm not a part of this theory because I believe that him and Nesta are mates first, and then the power of death is just kind of a part of it. There's so many other instances of him and Nesta being equals, being soul bonded partners, having very two sides of the same coin personalities. It's just so far beyond the powers of death. And I like them being mates.
We could honestly do a whole episode on Nesta's death power, but we are purposefully not going to go too much into that power today, especially as the Inner Circle is beginning to understand it. It's so tempting for us, and there's so much to discuss, but there's just too much else to cover today, and we have a whole book of Nesta to dive into with all of this deliciousness. I find it so intriguing that the wind moans Nesta's name. The environmental elements are alive in their own way, and I wonder, could this be a reference to the old gods being the environment that we quoted earlier? I feel like that might be a stretch, but not really.
Not really. I do have another idea. Unfortunately, it's going to have to wait for Maasverse Madness, though.
Amren will later say that she doesn't want to share how she escaped the prison in fear of these elements listening and reporting back to the prison. This territory is alive, and I think it's excited that Nesta has emerged and woken some magic within this territory. As the Bone Carver taunts them about Nesta, Cassian falls into something like a trance. Is it a true trance that the magic lures him into, or is he, I'll say, just simply lost in thought? I wonder if it's a little bit of both, but what I would give for his POV in this scene.
I think it's definitely more lost in thought. And I think it's also a little scared. He figured that the Bone Carver would know something about Nesta, but knowing this much and the Bone Carver's how the wind calls her name, Nesta, Nesta. And he's like, what the fuck? I think it's definitely got a bit of that. But let's go back to the Bone Carver because Feyre's got a proposal for you, good sire. Fae-vorite tosses the Bone Carver a bone from the Adder, aka the Adder Bartok, after she made him street splooge in Valaris. I love that Fae-vorite wonders, where did we keep this bone? Going back to our ACOWAR coverage, wow, that feels like forever ago. This is another instance of Rhys having just bones upon bones in his little pocket realm. He is an episode of Hoarders just with bones. I'm convinced.
Let's walk through Fae-vorite's proposal because compared to the rest of our discussion so far this episode, it's pretty straightforward. They have the Book of Breathings, and within it are spells that could send someone like the Bone Carver home to his realm. Since the Bone Carver has deadly powers that would be very helpful on a battlefield, Fae-vorite proposes that he aid them in this war against their enemies, and in exchange, they will send him back to his world. Win-win, right?
Nope, because the Bone Carver's nah, I'm good. It turns out that his homeworld is probably nothing more than dust on a plane and isn't a place he wants to be. More on that.
I get it. I would feel the same way. I'd be like, no, my world's dust. I'm going to stay here.
I'm going to stay in this prison cell instead. So Fae-vorite gives him another offer. What about improving his living conditions in this world? Basically, what about not living in a cell anymore, my guy? And he's still like, no way, because he only wants to be in the cell, Cursebreaker, nowhere else.
Luckily for all of us scratching our heads about why he would prefer to be in the cell, the Bone Carver launches into his backstory. He has 2 siblings, his twin sister Striga, also known as the Weaver, and his older brother Koschei, and they are much, much stronger than the Bone Carver.
Fun fact, Striga in Slavic folklore is a female demon with 2 hearts and 2 souls and 2 sets of teeth. Yikes. And Koschei is known in Russian folklore as the immortal or the deathless, which is what Vasa actually calls him in Silver Flames.
The 3 of them fell into this world long before Prythian was Prythian, and his 2 siblings delighted being in this world because the ancient Fae feared and worshipped them. Again, going back to that old gods conversation we had earlier walking to the prison. To hide from his siblings and their terrible power, the Bone Carver took it upon himself to find his way here to the prison. After the Bone Carver hid from his siblings, a clever Fae female warrior tricked Striga into diminishing her power and confining her to the middle. And then this warrior bound Koschei to his little lake on the continent. Neither of these old gods could be killed. They were too strong. They could only be contained. All of this happened before Prythian was carved up and any High Lord was crowned. So it was either when the Daglan ruled or it was immediately afterward when Fionn was High King. As the Bone Carver is giving us this information, which, by the way, Old Gods is today's Suriel topic, so we will be going way more into it then, he traces 3 overlapping interlocked circles in the dirt that represent him and his siblings. Nicole, take it away.
Well, I can't yet. I will be discussing this later in Maasverse Madness because I read this and my jaw dropped. Anyway, so because his siblings are still alive, even if they are trapped in their, respective areas, the Bone Carver does not want to be accessible to them in any way and instead wishes to remain hidden. In fact, he's actually believed long dead, something he's very grateful for. Quote, "If you knew my brother and sister, Cursebreaker, you would find this a much wiser and more comfortable alternative." But we need to talk about that Fae warrior who contained the Bone Carver siblings. Originally, all this time, I was thinking it was Fionn, but no, because the Bone Carver says, quote, "Clever, that Fae warrior. Her bloodline is long gone, though a trace still runs through some human line." Wow, this is a huge clue for Feyre and the Archerons that they could be part Fae or have some kind of Fae warrior bloodline in their human blood. If Feyre and her sisters are these powerful Fae warriors, it makes sense that there is that trace in their bloodline. Maybe this is why he shows up as her son, as kind of like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Hey, your lineage is important. If that was the case, though, I would assume that he would show up like as one of her parents, maybe like where the Fae blood is descending from. I'm assuming it's her mother. I don't know if Papa Archeron has Fae blood, but honestly, he's trading spices in Valaris and jewels in Adriata, so he could have some Fae blood, and that's maybe his in. But who could this Fae warrior be? Could it be someone we maybe know?
My bet is it's not someone we know or have learned about yet, but we will learn more about it as we continue with the series. I initially thought that it was High King Fionn's queen, but the way bloodlines are mentioned doesn't add up. So yes, we will continue this conversation at the end of today's episode. This brings me back to exactly what you're saying about it being a big clue about the Archeron's family lineage. We have these 3 Archeron sisters, a trace of Fae runs through a human bloodline. Come on, I'm convinced. And it all plays into how important they are to this world. Yeah. You all know that I don't have a whole lot of theory hills that I die on. This is one of them, definitely.
Yep.
Back to Feyre's proposal that the Bone Carver help them. Because while he clearly wants to stay in this prison, the Bone Carver does have a counteroffer. He wants the Ouroboros mirror. And what is this Ouroboros mirror, you ask? It was old, even when the Bone Carver and his siblings were young. Which, wow, that is crazy old. We are talking tens of thousands of years. It is a window to the world where all could be seen, all could be told through its dark surface. It used to belong to his sister Striga, but now it is an heirloom of Kyr's in the Court of Nightmares.
which, fun fact, as it's described later, the Ouroboros is known in this human world as a circular symbol of a snake or a dragon eating its own tail. Like, I just picture a dog that's like chasing its own tail, and that's this big scary mirror. But it is used to represent the eternal cycle of destruction and rebirth. Question though for you, because the bone carver was pretty adamant on not leaving his cell until the moment he realized that they're going to the Court of Nightmares later today. And then he was like, oh, you could also bring me an Ouroboros mirror and then I'll be willing to go. What do you think finally made him change his mind? Like from being, no, I will not leave this cell to this mirror is the only thing.
I don't think that he necessarily changed his mind. It's like he got an idea of, ooh, I do want this from her mentioning the Court of Nightmares, and he can keep his mirror in his cell where he wants to be. It's more of like, oh, like I actually do have something that I do want from you. Fae-vorite is like, so that's it? Just kidding. She gives a more diplomatic answer than that. But she'll learn soon enough how complex this request is from the bone carver. As Kier will explain, quote, to take the Ouroboros, to claim it, you must first look into it. And everyone who has attempted to do so has either gone mad or been broken beyond repair. Even a High Lord or two, if legend is true. So it is yours, if you dare to face it. I'm going to put a pin in our Ouroboros discussion just for now, because we will explore this so much more in later episodes about what it means for our girl and why the bone carver is so insistent on only this mirror in exchange for his death god services. You know what's not complex though? Taking our AG1. I first gave AG1 a try because my tummy needed help. I was stressed, I was sluggish, and as a whole, I knew my immune system needed that extra support. Since drinking AG1 daily, I felt a real difference in my body and mind, just feeling good all around. Like I don't know how else to explain it. Like my digestive system is happy and I've got more energy throughout the day so I can focus and keep up with my kids.
That is because AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports your body's universal needs like gut optimization, stress management, and immune support. Since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition, continuously refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your baseline health.
AG1 has become part of both Jake and my morning routine. No matter how crazy our days are going to be, we both know that we're doing something good for ourselves by starting our day off with AG1.
If there is one product we had to recommend to elevate your health, it is AG1. That's why we're so excited that AG1 is sponsoring today's episode. If you want to take ownership over your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs. Lexi and I are doing a lot of traveling. You heard all the shows and all the things we have coming up. We are taking AG1 on every single one of these trips. You can get 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase at drinkag1.com/FFG. That's drinkag1.com/FFG. Check it out.
Our trips to the prison always make me need an ibuprofen afterward. A little peek behind the scenes, it's a guaranteed extra 5 hours of parsing through so much text and pulling in the Maasverse and sorting through what's a spoiler and what's not a spoiler, going down theory rabbit holes and trying to figure out how in the world we're going to make sense of all of it on the podcast.
Last night, I was doing the Maasverse Madness section. I had 16 books open on my computer at one time. And I was like, ow, this hurts. The best way. It's so fun. It's like a big puzzle piece, but it's just tens of thousands of words of a big puzzle piece.
So let's talk about something lighter, like Elaine. That's not lighter. I'm sorry. She is out of her room, though. She may be staring out the window in the family library, but you know what? Baby steps. She also seems to be talking in 2 different kinds of riddles now. One that reflects her heightened Fae senses. She can see all the way to the sea now, and she can hear their heartbeats. Fae-vorite thinks about how she had to learn all on her own how to drown out these sounds like what Elaine is hearing right now, which, first of all, it's so sad that she experienced that alone when Tamlin should have been there to help her adjust to her new Fae body. But also, Feyre's strained relationship with Nesta and her preoccupation with the war efforts have made her forget what her sisters are experiencing now as Fae too. They are the only 3 people in Prythian who are human and now Fae, and you would think that she would be there to comfort and guide them with this adjustment. I'm not going to blame her for that though, because that's just not their relationship, specifically with Nesta, but also like no one really knows how to act with Elaine or to help her. I'm not saying that Fae-vorite is in the right or the wrong here because I just don't think efforts would have gone very well. More than anything, it goes to show the deep-rooted issues in this sisterly relationship that have always been there. But then Elaine's comments about her heightened senses shift to a more confusing riddle. Quote, I can hear the sea, even at night, even in my dreams, the crashing sea and the screams of a bird made fire. What? As Elaine's seer gifts manifest, she cannot distinguish what is real and what isn't. Yes, she has heightened Fae senses, but it is intertwined with her other magic that makes it impossible to differentiate the two. I'm thinking Elaine left her room to find the sea she could hear, to try to find the firebird who screams that she can hear.
Oh, I love that. Well, and not to mention, after suggesting, like, do you want to come tend the garden at the townhouse? Elaine says, quote, will the bird of fire come sit in the trees and watch me? If I was Fae-vorite, I'd be like, what kind of Stephen King novel are you talking about, right? Like, that is terrifying.
Well, and it does, again, show how she doesn't understand what is going on and can't differentiate what's real and not real. I just can't wait to get to that seer reveal next episode.
Well, and I think Azriel's a huge part of her figuring out what's real and what's not real, which is really sweet and very much what we'll talk about later. But these half riddles, half truths are what make Nesta and Feyre step away so that they can go and chat about next steps for their middle sister. And I gotta say, they might not be friendly by any means, but they're working together with a common goal of helping Elaine, which props to Nesta and Feyre. That's rare when we see them working like this. But someone else walks into the library. It is Lucien disobeying orders. However, he does not walk in specifically to see Elaine because he's very surprised she's actually left her room. No, he is just wanting a book. Feyre, curiosity taking over her morality, casts her Daemati powers, and suddenly, for the second time, she is in his head. Or I guess, really third time if you include when she accidentally slipped into his head when she was dreaming. But second time awake, consciously, we'll say.
And immediately, we are literally in Lucien's POV during this interaction with his mate. His first thoughts are being so concerned about Elaine's well-being and how thin she is, how she isn't eating. And then, yes, Lucien's instinctual Fae male mate territorialism bubbles to the surface, uninvited by him. Quote, touch her, smell her, taste her. The instincts were a running river. He fisted his hands at his sides. We know from Rhys just how animalistic these Fae males can be when it comes to their mates. And Lucien, like Rhys once did, feels that instinct. But he, also like Rhys once had to do, is actively fighting against it and pushing it down because he doesn't want that feeling of entitlement towards Elaine. That isn't Lucien's character. He cares about her well-being more than he cares about getting what his instincts desire. I know the fandom has very strong opinions about Elaine and Lucien, but no matter whether they wind up together, he is actively trying and succeeding to control his biological Fae male urges, and he deserves some credit with that. Lucien is here in Valaris primarily to see Elaine. He is pulled toward his mate. He can't stay away from her, just like Cassian feels towards Nesta, and just like Rhys felt toward Feyre when he courted her. But Lucien knows that he is not even on Elaine's radar. She is in love and was supposed to get married to a human man. She is a shell of herself after turning Fae and struggling with her trauma. And he recognizes that he will only hurt the already delicate situation by inserting himself into the mix. So even though it goes against his instincts to be near her, he is giving her space. He is respecting the rules of not approaching her. The only rule he purposefully broke right now is entering the library. He had no idea she would be in here, and now that he stumbled across her, he really is being a gentleman. Never in a million years did Lucien expect his mate would be Feyre's sister, and he's grappling with how this turned his life upside down and how to proceed. Several centuries ago, he had been in love and thought the mating bond would snap into place with Jasminda. She was bursting with life. She was full of laughter and mischief. And here, Elaine is as opposite as can be. It's hard for Lucien not to compare, to wonder why the Cauldron dealt him this hand of fate. Jasminda had chosen him, made him feel appreciated and loved, probably for the first time and only time in Lucien's life, while Elaine has been thrown at him and clearly wants nothing to do with him, now during her darkest time and when she begins healing.
One thing I do have to say here is that I was looking at the end of the book, and Vasa is described as being this fierce and untamed wild woman, which isn't far off with how he describes Jasminda as wild and free. I'm not saying I'm like, yay, shipping Lucian and Vasa. I'm just saying that parallel might not be an accident.
I'm just going to say it. This whole situation sucks for Lucian. I'm not saying he's entitled to Elaine by any means. I'm just trying to put us in his shoes, feeling this kind of rejection when he wishes there was a chance to even explore this mating bond. And this rejection isn't even wholly targeted at him. It's rejection of life, of a future that isn't the one she expected as a human. And he feels such immense guilt because yeah, he played a part in how this came to be for her, even if it was mostly by association. After this encounter, when he talks with Feyre and Nesta, he tells them that she needs fresh air. He knows that he can't insert himself and be the one to directly help her. She doesn't want that. Her family doesn't want that. But even from the outside looking in, Lucian just wants to help Elaine heal.
Let's take a moment and now flip the script and look at this scene through Elaine's POV. In walks this male who she only knows as her mate. She doesn't even necessarily know his name, just that he is her mate, which Elaine knows very little about this concept of mating bonds being a human. Really, she only knows what she saw from Feyre and Rhys in their last visit last book, and mates were not the topic of conversation. The Queens in the War was. She does not know about the pole, the equals, the anything. She really only knows about the title. The mating bond was thrown, as Lucian says, at both of them. Unlike Feyre, who had time last book to get over her breakup with Tamlin before she learned about her and Rhys's mating bond, Elaine is mourning her life that she was supposed to have with Grayson. She fell in love with him. She lost her virginity to him. She was supposed to marry him in a few days. And this is all while she is also being thrown a mating bond. Also, kindly, Lucian wants to help her out of this vacancy. But unlike Feyre, when she was pulled into her depression, and Rhys was, a big part of what helped pull her out of it, Rhys and Feyre had an existing relationship prior, where despite Feyre's best efforts, she was already starting to trust him before she fell into her depression. So Rhys was able to extend a hand to her because they already had that bond, figuratively and literally. Lucian is a complete stranger who is trying to help her, and not to mention he was also played a part of why she was turned high fae in the first place. And on top of all of this, like I just mentioned, her life was literally flipped upside down. And Lucian was a big part of that 180. She recognizes his name from her sister's stories in the Spring Court, which, side note, I love that when she says his name out loud, Lucian basically comes in his pants and has an out-of-body experience. It's weirdly sweet and not in the way I described it, but it's weirdly sweet on the page. But then she calls him out saying, "You betrayed us." And while she is not wrong, two things can be true at the same time, Lucian would rather have had her push him out a window Bran Stark style. All he can muster is, quote, "It was a mistake." Can someone please just let Lucian be fucking happy? Please. But Elaine continues saying that she can hear his heart. And on a first read, you think that this is just a continuation of her earlier conversation with Feyre. But, quote, "When I sleep, I can hear your heart beating through the stone." She angled her head, as if the city view held some answer. "Can you hear mine?" Okay, so we've already discussed the possibility of there being a mating bond between her and Tamlin, which if you want the full download, listen to episode 11 of ACOWAR. The TLDR version of this is that she's actually hearing Tamlin's Heart of Stone from ACOWAR Book 1, and Lucian was covering up their mating bond at the end of ACOWAR, not wanting, their whole reason to go get Feyre to be soiled by the fact that, oh shit, Tamlin and Elaine are actually mates. Personally, we are not on board with this theory because of many reasons, but to name one is that Tamlin doesn't have a Heart of Stone anymore because Feyre broke Amarantha's curse, and it is confirmed that Feyre could hear his heartbeat at the end of ACOWAR, where she was not able to prior. Again, if you want the full theory, listen to ACOWAR episode 11. So what could this "I can hear your heart beating through the stone" mean if it's not a Tamlin and Elaine mates mention? First of all, it could be literal. They are in a house carved of rock out of the mountain itself. Is she referring to hearing his heart beating through the house, through their bond?
I think that's the most likely answer, but where's the fun in leaving it at that? There's a theory out there that she is referring to the prison, and she'll have a trial of sorts around the prison in a later book. Feyre overcame her challenge under the mountain, one sacred mountain. Nesta overcomes her challenge at Romiel, another sacred mountain. And the prison is under the third sacred mountain in Prythian, so maybe it alludes to Elaine's destiny. Although I do think that it's Nesta who is more connected to the prison, but there is that theory.
Well, it could be all three Archeron sisters connected to the prison for reasons we will discuss later. Also, she could be referring to a siphon stone, and she's actually hearing Asriel's heartbeat, especially with that line of, quote, as if the city held the answer. We don't know exactly where Az is at the moment, but he could be in the city, and so she's actually looking towards him. Or this could be something we have no idea. We will not be able to understand until we get Elaine's book, or at least Elaine's major POV book. And she tells him, quote, no one ever does. No one ever looked. Not really. I will say Asriel is someone who does ask her questions about her ramblings later, which I do give him major props for. I will give Feyre also major props for seeing her sister needing to have a goal or be near something comfortable again. So she suggests that she, Nesta, and Lucien all move to the townhouse in Velaris, which is the same townhouse that Feyre resided when she came back to life out of her depression, especially given the life of the city that is just outside the doorstep of the townhouse. But she tells Elaine to come and tend to the garden. Points for our high lady Feyre. Well done. But let's go to Asriel and Elaine. There's so much. Oh my God. After Asriel carries Elaine down from the House of Wind to her new residence of the townhouse, he asks her if she would like to go and see the garden, which she nods. So Asriel, being ever the gentleman, holds out an arm for her to take, and she looks at his hands with the siphon atop of it and says, beautiful, causing Asriel to blush. It begins! Elaine is much more comfortable around Asriel for many reasons. First, she has known him longer. They had dinner with everyone last book. She was able to ask him questions about flying, which causes her to right now not really feel the need to balk at him like most people do.
Exactly. They built the rapport last book, and I think even then she brought out this inner soft side of Asriel. And now he is tapping into that gentle nature because it's what she needs most. And she responds to it in a way that she doesn't with anyone else. Maybe it's because he is different enough from her sisters, who are kind of like being a little bit overbearing with their protection of her. But also he's familiar too because they have already established that trust with one another.
Well, I also think back to last book when Rhys was like, what do you want to do, Feyre? Like, he always was giving her choice so that she was taking autonomy over her life again. You mentioned that the two sisters are being rather protective and being a little bit hovering, whereas Asriel's a little bit more like, choose your own adventure. What do you want? Asriel was also on their side in Highburn. He will also later ask her questions about her visions, showing that he does not believe her to be mad, and rather he wants to understand where these ramblings are coming from. So while, yes, we're going literally back to back with a Lucien and Elaine scene and an Asriel and Elaine scene, it's impossible to not look at the comparisons between these two. And you can look at this as Asriel is basically the opposite of Lucien. And while that's sort of true, some of them I would argue more than others, I am not saying that Asriel and Elaine are destined to be together because of the reasons we just laid out. But what I am saying is that Asriel is a person that Elaine can find comfort in this chapter of her life when so much feels unstable and where she feels very unheard and overprotected, and like you were saying.
And it's so poetic that the Shadow Singer, the Spy Master, is able to understand her and connect with her.
Which leads to an utterly iconic moment with Lucien smelling that Elaine and Az went out to the garden, and he gets all like mate growly. And Rhys says, quote, relax, Asriel isn't the ravishing type. Well, I will say in the ACOWAR playlist, the Steal My Girl song is the bridge between the Lucien and Elaine section and the Asriel and Elaine section. And I'm proud of that. Feyre will notice Asriel and Elaine's closeness later and wonder to Rhys why the Cauldron did not make them mates. Does make me wonder if she ships Az and Elaine or Lucien and Elaine more, because it always does feel very back and forth, because with Silver Flames, it definitely feels more towards Lucien. I don't know. I don't even know if she knows. But could this be foreshadowing of an Asriel and Elaine relationship ending up together? Or is this something to throw us readers completely off scent, which SJM could very easily do? Personally, I feel like this, why didn't the Cauldron make them mates? It's a little on the nose for SJM foreshadowing, but only time will tell.
I like to think it represents the complexities and how a romance story isn't always linear. If Elaine and Lucien end up together despite their mating bond, I know I've talked about that a lot, this Azriel element isn't necessarily to throw us readers off, but to reflect what Elaine needs at this time in her life and how it helps her find the ultimate love. I really am sorry to make this comparison, but like Feyre and Tamlin, and then how she would not have been able to be with Rhys like right from the get-go. She needed that other romance before she could grow into who she was meant to be with. That could be something like this here as well. Please don't come at me for comparing Azriel and Tamlin. I do not mean it in that way. I'm just romance is not always linear. That is what I'm trying to say.
Well, like, we both have relationships before we ended up with our husbands. And I do not think I would have been able to be with Brett in the way that I am if I hadn't gone through the plethora of people prior. Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and this will also help Azriel move on from Mor, which will really be happening later on in this book too, and definitely in Silver Flames, who, you know, he's been hoping that there's been a mating bond with her for 500 years. So it is both nurturing and helping each of them grow in their own respective love lives. So this Azriel and Elaine, whatever is between them, it is good for both of them in their respective ultimate love lives.
Lexi and I have been very open about not necessarily choosing a ship, because we're about to deep dive these books in a way that our opinions will probably change. They'll probably morph. We'll probably get more information, yada, yada, yada. So one of the big things that when we're looking at this part of the story, when it comes to Azriel and Elaine, and Lucien and Elaine, is where are they in their chapters right now? And like you're saying, Lex, like Azriel is what Elaine needs in this chapter right now. I don't think Lucien is what she needs in this chapter right now.
Because of what you were saying about that mating bond being kind of thrust upon them. And she's just like, I can't handle this right now. She
doesn't know what a mating bond is. Like, she's like, what does that mean? Like, she only knows from Rhys and Feyre, which, let's be real, Rhys and Feyre are an intense example of a mating bond. And she's like, I'm dealing with trauma. Like, I can't have that relationship with someone right now. So,
and Lucien recognizes that, and he is respecting those boundaries.
So when Feyre asks Rhys on if there is a choice in the mating bond, we learn that yes, there is a sort of basically choice. Yes. And sometimes the bond does choose poorly. And because of that, sometimes mates can reject that mating bond. But there will always be that tug, and it's easier for females to ignore, but it can drive males mad, which is why many mated pairs do try to make it work, even if they don't have, again, that intensity that Feyre and Rhys have.
And it goes to show just how unique their mating bond is, like we've talked about.
But Rhys, after his mating bond download, asks Feyre not to play matchmaker, to which she says, quote, I would never meddle in someone else's affairs. Literally, what, Feyre? Have you been awake in the last 2 books? Like, are you serious?
It's moments like this where her youth is on full display. And that's not even the last time I'm going to say that in this episode. She can have a bit of a lack of self-awareness when it comes to her busybody. And she is very self-aware in most other aspects of her life, except for her busybodying.
She thinks that she knows best when it comes to love, which is fucking rich, given her line of lovers from Isaac's average sex lover extraordinaire.
Isaac, sex lover extraordinaire.
And then Tamlin. Obviously, we've discussed Tamlin endlessly and how he was exactly what she needed at the time. But it's rich coming from Feyre, who's 20, versus all of the other people who are 500. Anyway, continue.
But our girl Feyre has great self-awareness when it comes to something else. She feels guilty for going into Lucien's mind earlier and spying on him and Elaine. So she brings it up with Rhys in their mind-to-mind communication. She's too afraid to speak it out loud, which is a beautiful show-don't-tell way of conveying this heavy and guilt-ridden emotion associated with her actions. She says into Rhys's mind, quote, I needed to be sure that he wasn't about to try to grab her, to sell us out. I'll be honest, I would have done the exact same thing that she did if I had those powers. She didn't invade his mind out of malicious intent. She did it to protect her sister. And the fact that she felt bad about it shows her humanity. Even in the moment when she was about to slip into his mind, she felt bad and knew it wasn't the right thing to do, But the right thing is so subjective in this complex world. And that's a message that Rhys leans in on here. He's been through this exact same situation plenty of times as a Demati. Like he says, quote, "It's always complicated and it never gets easier, no matter how many centuries I've been doing it." And remember back at the summer court when she had a similar experience after going into Tarquin's mind too. And he's like, what you did prevented really bad things happening. So yes, it might not have felt right, but it was for the greater good. He helps pull her out of this guilt, which I can absolutely appreciate because it doesn't help to dwell on what's happened. All you can do is acknowledge it and make a decision about what you'll do in a similar situation moving forward. Exactly like Rhys says, quote, "Then say it's the last and be done with it." He doesn't speak this into her mind as a, I don't want to talk about this anymore kind of way, but rather to help his mate recognize that, yes, it's okay to feel this. And it's also important to move on and learn from her feelings and not let it bog her down. The way Rhys comforts her by saying Lucien broke the rules first, it's such a partner thing to do. Is it a super solid argument? Kind of depends on the person, but it does help her feel better and put things in a little bit of perspective, taking the full blame of the situation off herself. Was it an invasion of Lucien's privacy? Absolutely. Was it done to protect her sister because he violated a rule in the first place? Also, yes. Does she feel guilty about it and prefer not to do it again? Yes to that too. So, gotta move on, can't dwell on the past. I imagine for Fae who live such long lives, it's extra important to learn how to move on from these kind of morally gray situations. They have enough baggage as it is that situations like this ultimately need to take the back seat, and they learn how to deal with their emotions efficiently, learn from their mistakes, if that's what we're calling this here, and move on. By the way, I need to say just how adorable it is that this conversation takes place as they both pin her hair into place. And I can see this intimate partner scene so vividly, and it warms my heart. And at the very end, Rhys purrs into her ear, ready to be wicked. Like, who in the night court imagines they are doing this in front of the mirror before going to crush their bones? It's adorable.
God, I love them. And it's time to head back to the hewn city, which, by the way, I was curious what hewn means. It means to cut or to cut down, which feels very appropriate given what they did to Mor when she was young, and also how they are just very cutthroat in the hewn city. Before we get into this delicious entrance, let's do a quick fit watch. Feyre is in a more modest version of her previous cobwebs with a raven's feather tiara.
May I just say how excited I am for you to wear your sophisticated midnight gown to the Dragon Gauntlet, which resembles her Court of Nightmares dress. Like, it's almost like exactly what I picture her to be wearing right now. And also, just shameless plug, we will have the link to shop this dress collection. It's in the show notes, and Nicole's dress is stunning.
I look hot.
Gosh, I can't wait.
I look hot in that dress. I love it so much. Rhys is in his normal polished black clothes, no wings, with a crown to match Feyre's. Amren is in loose pants and a cropped blouse. I'm not going to lie, I literally wore this outfit like yesterday. And Nesta is in a very simple, brutal dress of impenetrable black that is very modest compared to Feyre and Mor's. Nesta's has sleeves and a high neck. That is the modest version, absolutely, which feels about right. Nesta is new to the scandalous dressings of the Fae, especially the Court of Nightmares. Back in the human lands, it was gowns that were more appropriate for society. I only picture like dresses from Bridgerton here, like insert that exact style. Nesta might still have the modesty of the human realm, but the color of her clothing is starting to change to represent her slowly opening her eyes to this new life. Once in the Court of Nightmares, Feyre notices something very interesting, though, as they walk down the aisle. There is only one throne. I love one bed at the inn, one horse, one dragon, and now we are at one throne. It's my favorite trope. Yes, there was only one last time Feyre and Rhys got freaky on the throne, but there is now a High Lord and a High Lady up in this bitch. But, of course, Rhys knows exactly what to do. With only one throne, he escorts Feyre, darling, to the throne, and she sits down, and then he perches on the arm of the throne. Scandal, and I love it.
What a power move for the two of them.
So Rhys might, in this moment, blame the Court of Nightmares for not having two chairs out. How dare they? But he was glad that it was like this to make a statement. And actually, I kind of read it as he orchestrated this in the background, but it's not really outright said it that way on the page. Fae-vorite is just as much deserving of that throne as he is. And if they both had thrones, it might as well be seen as, oh, well, she is his high lady, but he is still on a throne. I think very similarly to like how Amarantha was on a throne and Tamlin, well, on a smaller throne, he was still on a throne next to her under the mountain. So I think about it like where Amarantha was still the power move and Tamlin was just sitting on a throne. This is a neon sign to the Court of Nightmares with Fae-vorite on the throne and Reach just perched on the little arm like a little kitty cat. This is a neon sign to the Court of Nightmares to treat her with the reverence they have treated their High Lord for years. But sadly, the Court of Nightmares does not believe Fae-vorite's power in the showing from Rhys.
So hold on, because I was under the impression the Court of Nightmares did not know she was High Lady before they arrived here. I'll be honest, I don't think that they would have a throne for her, even if they did know, because they're misogynistic like that and like you're talking about. But Feyre's reveal as High Lady, it was news to them, right?
I was under the impression that it was kind of like they knew, but maybe not.
I read it as they didn't know.
But still, even with that, they knew that she is his mate. So with that, it would be, we'll call it court decorum for them to still have two thrones because she is his mate. So I think the one throne was like it's Rhys and his mate can stand off to the side, you know? And Rhys is like, let's have her sit on the throne and I'm going to perch on it like a little kitty cat and have them bow in front of her on the throne, which I love Rhys for 1,000,001 reasons. This is 1,000,002. Like, I love this kind of showing. Now, there are 3 high fae from the crowd who send up their tendrils of power towards Fae-vorite to test her out, test the waters. And she pounces on that lurking power, slamming talon-sharp magic down on them, making them cry out in the back, ah! Like, I just imagine that, like, in the silence. And Feyre's display of power works. Don't fuck with Feyre, darling, on her throne.
We need to talk about this for just a second. 3 seemingly random fae in the crowd tested her and her power by sending their tendrils of power up the dais. Who has the balls to do that in front of Rhys? I understand the sentiment behind it. Testing her, feeling her out, and she showed the fuck up. What were they expecting? For Rhys to defend her and therefore show her hand that she isn't powerful enough for the throne? No matter the reason, this is ballsy to begin with. And go Feyre for her response, making someone literally winnow out of there. I laugh every time I read that part where they're like, ah, and then they just flee.
It's so badass. I love it.
Amren and Nesta vanish to go play with some of the magical trove kept in the Court of Nightmares to give Nesta practice for figuring out how to fix the wall. This is why Nesta came with the Inner Circle for this visit, because there are plenty of things in the Court of Nightmares to practice on. I interpret it as needing to be around ancient and powerful magic, perhaps some objects that appeal to the like calls to like. If the Ouroboros is here, who knows what other magical treasures are as well. Nesta will later admit to Feyre that she wasn't successful in feeling anything out. Amren brought Nesta to a room full of treasure with strange objects, quote, as if it were alive, aware. And Nesta had a training exercise with a form of magic designed to repel intruders like the wall likely will be. Amren wanted her to find the weaknesses.
Which, can we take a moment and acknowledge how big of a deal it is for Nesta to later admit that she failed in this test to Feyre? We know that Nesta is not someone who likes looking less than or bad at something, especially in front of Feyre, who kept her family together for many years. Even though it's not the kindest tone, I'll admit, she does admit that vulnerability to Feyre later, which I am proud of Nesta for doing that. Let's get into the reason why our crew is even in the Court of Nightmares in the first place, shall we? In the council room in the Hewn City, Rhys, Feyre, Mor, Asriel, and Kier are all sitting down for the big ask of Kier bringing his Darkbringer legions to fight alongside them against Hybern. But Kier, having guessed that they would be here to ask him this, he's already a few steps ahead. Since he finds himself sympathetic to Hybern's cause, he finds it hard to agree to bring his legion to Rhys and Prithian's aid. Just royally fuck this guy. He sucks. Since the people in Hybern are trapped on the island and Kier says stagnant, he believes that there's not that many differences between the people in the Hewn City and those on Hybern. While we don't know this for sure, we can strongly assume that a big reason behind this resistance to help is because Kier is power hungry, to say the least. If he fights with Hybern and Hybern wins the war, he could very well end up ruler of the Night Court, or at least ruler who doesn't have to have Rhysand above him. We've speculated on the pod that while Rhys is away, Kier is in heaven in the Court of Nightmares as leader of the Hewn City. I mean, this scene, he literally refers to the mountain and the Court of Nightmares belonging to him before Rhys is like, are you serious? But then Rhys shows up on his many visits and makes Kier literally beg at his feet and puts him back in his place. I guarantee that it has crossed Kier's mind that he could get rid of Rhys and ally with Hybern in one fell swoop. So Kier starts to test how far he can push Rhys. Quote, "And what would you give me for a shot at this war, Rhysand? You hoard yourself to Amarantha, but what about your mate?" To which Rhysand responds with claws gouging marks in the table and threatening his life. I mean, fair. Like, that's honestly so fair.
I'm surprised that's all that happened, to be honest.
I'm surprised Kier is still living for many reasons, but this is one of them. I definitely don't think that Kier actually wants Fae-vorite in the scene, but instead he remembers how clearly he was humiliated last time that they were here just a few months ago. So instead, he's toying with Rhys because he has something that Rhysand wants, and he just wants to feel even slightly in control. This dude sucks.
The fact that he even suggested this shows how bold he is. He just suggested whoring out the High Lady of the Night Court, Rhys's mate, to Rhys's face. It calls back to him calling Feyre a whore last visit, which led Rhys to break his bones. I'm honestly surprised Rhys didn't splatter him right here and now. The fact that he doesn't kind of shows his hand and how desperate they are for Kier's alliance, and I'm willing to bet that was another reason why Kier poked this see. Yeah, it's like, okay, how desperate are you right now? Realistically, though, Kier wants something else. And not even an alliance with the Autumn Court will suffice, which, don't worry, we will definitely get into Eris and all of that in a moment. Kier wants space. He wants his people to be free of this mountain. Because you see, Hybern answered the question of where Rhys and his inner circle goes when they're not bothering the Court of Nightmares. Kier, unfortunately, now knows about Velaris after Hybern's attack several months ago. And he wants his court to have access to the City of Starlight. While more vocally and Feyre silently protest, Rhys doesn't refuse. Because see, he anticipated Kier would now know about Velaris after the Hybern attack, and he would want access to the city. And according to him, he took the necessary precautions. Remember the meeting with the palaces that I really wanted to be in on, the 4 marketplaces in the city last stretch of chapters? Well, the meeting was to discuss not allowing Kier and his court any access to any business in Velaris. So while they may be allowed in, they won't be able to do anything in Velaris except wander the streets, which even then is kind of nice. But the point is, they would not be able to do anything else. He recognizes that Kier won't accept any alternative, any other offer. And Rhys is dead set on getting as many allies as they can to have even a chance against Hybern. Allowing the Court of Nightmares access to Velaris, as limited as it might be, is better than Hybern destroying Velaris altogether. Feyre observes, and Moore will later emphasize, that Kier doesn't actually want out of their mountain. He is only wanting access to Velaris to piss Moore off to take something precious from his daughter. And while I do absolutely agree that this is definitely at the forefront of his mind, I want to bring up that we readers only have access to a limited narrative. We are only seeing this scenario from Feyre's perspective, and I'll include Moore's too because she will be very forthcoming with her perspective. I wouldn't be surprised if Kier truly is pissed that there is a whole other city that is prosperous and vibrant that is the real symbol of the Night Court. And he wants in. He's frustrated that there is something better out there. So of course he wants access to Velaris, and especially wants it because he now understands how sacred Velaris is to Moore, who he obviously hates. She ended up having a better life in a better place despite what he did to her. And now he has a new way of getting revenge, of casting his asshole shadow over her and wedging himself in her happy life so he can bring her down the way he thinks she deserves. Rhys counters that there will be limited stays, limited visits of the citizens of the Court of Nightmares allowed in Velaris. And Kier says, done. We'll definitely talk more about Rhys's agreement, but for now, let's back up to the whole Eris entrance because, wow, we have a lot to unpack.
pause real quick because I love the fact that Eris has just been chilling in the hallway for several minutes while they talk to Kier. Like, I just picture him like waiting in the wings for his cue to like come in. Rhys welcomes Eris in and says that it's been 5 centuries since he's been in the Court of Nightmares. So I'm assuming that the last time that Eris was here was when he was having his whole marriage betrothal, working out everything with Mor.
Yes, which would have been before the war.
Yes.
Which technically, according to Helion, the Lady of the Autumn Court had very young children. So I think there's a little bit of a cauldron boil me there because he definitely was older than a young child during this incident. Anyway.
They're 500. I feel like 20 would be considered like young.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. So why the hell is Eris heir to the Autumn Court here in the Hewn City and part of these talks? He is here because he is willing to offer Kier and the Hewn City a formal alliance if Kier has his Darkbringers help with the war efforts. Remember that Kier has wanted the Autumn Court alliance for centuries. That's why he originally set up his daughter Mor to marry Eris, for the political alliance that it would create. And he was pissed, to say the very least, when it didn't pan out. Kier bluntly says an alliance with Eris is not enough to sway him to fight for Rhys, which is why he demands access to Velaris like we already talked about. Rhys really hoped that only the alliance with Eris would be enough, so he didn't have to agree to Velaris or have it even come up. But alas, Kier is a greedy dickwad. Rhys and Eris have their own agreement beyond Kier's involvement, though. Eris won't tell his father, the High Lord of the Autumn Court, that Thera has a grain of his power after he helped resurrect her and turn her Fae. Because remember, Lucian and now Eris have made it very clear that if Baron finds out about Thera's stealing, major air quotes, his power, he will kill her to get his power back. Now, does he need this power? No. He can still wield his fire magic just fine, and he doesn't even realize that it's missing. But it's the principle of the matter, as far as I understand it. And Baron is even more of a greedy dickwad than Kier. Okay, actually, that might be debatable, but you know what I mean. Eris knows better than to tell his father this useful information because he thinks that Thera might actually be the key to stopping the war, which, yay, thank you for believing in her. But still, he loves holding this deadly secret over Rhys and Thera and uses it to his advantage. In exchange for Eris keeping her secret, Rhys will support his bid. So now we're clear on the alliance conditions. Let's talk about how this even came to be. After the Frozen Lake battle, Rhys went to the Autumn Court and used his Daemati powers to make the other 2 Autumn Court brothers forget about Thera using her High Lord powers against them. But Eris did not teach his brothers how to shield like he learned because he needed to have the upper hand on his brothers because remember, it is cutthroat between them as they all compete for the High Lordship. All of this to say, Rhys couldn't infiltrate Eris's mind and make him forget too, so Eris has been on high alert knowing they are trying to protect this information about Thera and her powers. So recently, Azriel has been spying on the Autumn Court and specifically Eris to see if he tells his father, to see how much the High Lord knows about Thera's powers. Lucian was the one who suggested this, so the Inner Circle could plan accordingly for the upcoming High Lord meeting. A few days ago, Eris caught Azriel in the Autumn Court woods, leaving Az, Thera, and Rhys in quite the pickle. Rhys needed to use this bad situation they fell into to their advantage by working with Eris. Eris told Azriel he will keep their secret if, and only if, they support his bid to take the Autumn Court throne when the time comes. In fact, Eris is even like, Rhys, you could just kill my father and be done with it. I'll pledge troops right now. Rhys counters that is too messy, and since Baron sided with them last war, he's hoping he will again. Making sure Baron does side with them is up to Eris. That's another part of this agreement. So, in summary, Eris will stay silent about Thera's powers and convince his father to fight against Hybern. In exchange, the Night Court will support Eris when the time comes for him to overthrow his father to become the new High Lord of the Autumn Court. And Eris will formally ally with the Court of Nightmares if Kier pledges his Darkbringers to also fight against Hybern. Phew!
Wow! Well, we're going to be taking a moment in a bit to discuss the whole Inner Circle's reaction to Rhys's scheming and orchestrating behind their backs. We have to talk about who this hits closest to home, and that is Mor. Quote, betrayal and hurt. That was hurt flashing there for not warning us for this surprise. Let's take quick stock. Mor is in a meeting with her father, who she hates for many reasons, but number one is because he forced her to marry Eris, or at least tried to force her to marry Eris after her powers came in, and they were monumentally powerful. But this was not a marriage of two powerful people to be badasses. No, this was so that she can bear his children and have powerful offspring. So she sleeps with Cassian, causing Eris to break off their engagement, and in his response, Keir had Mor dumped into the Autumn Court with a note nailed to her womb saying that she was now Eris's problem. Then Eris left her in the forest to wither away. At least that's the side of the story we know right now. So big air quotes and take that with a grain of salt. Two of the males in this room are part of the most painful, most traumatic memories of Mor's life. So much so that when Eris smiles at her, she actually shrinks back in her seat. And a member of her chosen family is the one who orchestrated all of this. But it's not just Rhys who knew about this plan. It was Azriel too, someone who she trusts so much and someone she knows who loves her very intimately. So I'm sure there was a thought in her head that because of Azriel's feelings towards her, he would never do something to hurt her like this, which is why later when they're back in the townhouse and he puts his hand on her, she rips it away from him. And Azriel will be flexing his hand still to the next day, reliving that moment over and over. If Mor had known before, I just want to take a moment and speculate. I do think that she would have fought back, yes, when Rhys initially told her. But eventually, she would have understood, like she does a few days after cooling off in this chapter stretch. But at least she would not have been blindsided by Eris's entrance. Then Keir asks for Valaris. And as Mor notes, he doesn't actually care about going into the city. He only wants to take something beautiful away from his daughter. She has never had a home until Valaris. It became a place where she could be herself. Literally, her deepest secret is there. And while she might not share it with the Inner Circle yet because of fear of her family finding out, she does still sleep with women here from Rita's. And now her family, who she is doing everything to protect the secret from, is getting closer to this secret, which Rhys agrees to let Keir come to Valaris even after Mor told them not to promise Keir anything before the meeting even started. Yes, Rhys has had all of these precautions in place to make it so that Keir would have a terrible time in Valaris. But Mor doesn't know that. So again, she could have used a heads up, Rhys. This is ridiculous. Mor will come to understand why Rhys did this in the coming days. She will forgive him for the bullshit he pulls behind the scene. She will share with Feyre that if she lets this anger truly get the best of her and put a wedge between her and her chosen family, then the two males who caused her so much pain in her life win. I gotta hand it to Mor. That's very mature for just 24 hours later. Well done, girl. I would have been pissed for days.
We get a glimpse into Eris's side of the story with the repercussions of their broken engagement. Mor taunts him about if the asking price for his silence is another little bride for him to torture. And we're going to walk through his whole response because he flinches. Quote, "I don't know who fed you those lies to begin with, Morgan. Likely the bastards you surround yourself with." First of all, if Mor has the power of truth and can sense someone's intent like she did with Lucien before taking him to Valaris, how does this make sense? We know she can be lied to. It happens several times in these books. So was she just not ever purposefully using her powers to detect those lies? And that's not even touching on what the Bat Boys might have lied to her about. Like, that's a whole other speculation topic. Eris goes on to say, quote, "There were forces at work that you have never considered, and I am not going to waste my breath explaining them to you. Believe what you want about me." And then a little later in the scene, when he is taunting Mor about not being able to control her emotions around her father, he confirms that he wouldn't have touched her. The writing in the scene does a great show don't tell that he hates the idea of a forced bride like his mother was. He has seen how sad her life has become, and he is against putting a female through that, especially for his own marriage. And when she slept with Cassian, quote, "I knew why you did it." Again, that secret smile that had Mor shrinking. "So I gave you your freedom, ending the betrothal in no uncertain terms." He admits that, quote, "There are a few things I regret. That is one of them. But perhaps one day, now that we are allies, I shall tell you why, what it cost me." And then just last little thing here in Silver Flames, Eris will reiterate that he wants to explain himself to Mor. With all of this insight, we can gather that there is definitely more to the story than we currently know. And the fandom has had a field day speculating. I personally strongly believe that Eris knows Mor's secret about preferring females, and she knows that he knows her secret. We talked about that a little bit last episode too. There's even a line, quote, as if he knew something that Azriel didn't. I am convinced he knows about Mor's sexuality, especially because Azriel technically doesn't, or he's purposefully not looking for it. Eris doesn't want to trap her in a loveless marriage, and he wanted her to have the freedom to be with a female. He didn't realize her family would react the way they did, and he really regrets that. He didn't touch her when she was left in the woods, because if he did, I think it would somehow bind them together, whether by political rules or magic. I could see there being a binding spell between them for the betrothal, that if he touched her, they were required to get married or something like that. In Frost and Starlight, Mor recalls that he says to his guards upon finding her, quote, no one touches her. The moment we do, she's our responsibility. Then he said to her, quote, I take it you do not wish to live here, Morgan, as he's like looking down on her when she's helpless with the nail in her womb, and it's so tragic. If he or his guards, any of them there in the Autumn Court, touched her, she would fall under the Autumn Court's rule, and he knew that would be a fate worse than death to her. It was a lose-lose situation, so he ensured she wasn't trapped with him, even if it made him out to be an asshole. Like Rhys, he has kept his own evil mask all these centuries, so he's willing to be made out as the bad guy and let everyone think the worst of him. I actually think he anonymously sent word to Azriel like he did to Tamlin about Lucien, because not even Lucien, or I think even Tamlin, knows that it was Eris who notified Tamlin to help Lucien when he escaped to the Spring Court. So maybe he did something similar to Azriel to help Mor, because Azriel found Mor in those woods about a day later. And there's never any reasoning behind why he was in the Autumn Court and how he found her there. And I really do think that it was Eris who sent him that notification, but nobody knew that it was him, exactly the same way that he did that with Tamlin centuries later. There is a theory that he and Mor are actually mates, but they are both queer and reject the bond so they can be happy with others. Or minus that they're mates and he prefers males and didn't want the marriage either. I think you were talking about that last episode, Nicole. This could be what he wants to explain to Mor, and only Mor, when she's ready to hear it.
Well, and that isn't the end of Eris's surprises, because as Lexi alluded to, we get more information about that day with Lucien's lover being executed, because it looks like there's more to the story there too. Eris refused to be there when Jasminda was murdered. And because that was the first time and last time he ever defied his father, he was punished as a result. But when he got free, he found out that they were going to kill Lucien next. So Eris, like Lexi mentioned, anonymously got word to Tamlin to, quote, get the hell over to his own border. I love this slight dig at Tamlin for being a bad High Lord, even from Eris's download. It's delicious. When Tamlin found Lucien and his brothers, Tamlin killed one, Lucien killed the other, and the third ran all the way home. Eris ends his side of the story with sharing that not everyone is as lucky as the Inner Circle to have friends and family. This is a rare moment of honesty, and I'll even say jealousy, masked by his High Lord son arrogance from Eris. In Silver Flames, Cassian will tell Eris, quote, I think you might be a decent male deep down, trapped in a terrible situation. And I would have to agree. I honestly feel like if they can ever work their shit out, Eris and the rest of the Inner Circle are going to be great buds. Hopefully someday, maybe. Winnowing back to Velaris, though, we've got some feelings we need to talk about. Cassian, who was not at the meeting, he was guarding Velaris instead, is shocked to learn that Rhys is, quote, working with that prick. And he moves to Mor's side and puts a hand on her back, a silent showing of whose side he is taking in this argument. Even Lucien is like, yeah, yo, Eris sucks. Why did you do this? Which, side note, Feyre thinks about how Rhys probably hasn't filled in Lucien on all that Eris claimed with helping him that day, fleeing him from the Autumn Court, getting Tamlin, all that kind of stuff. And just, we say this a lot this episode, poor Lucien. I feel like the Inner Circle always knows more about his family drama than he does.
So mind to mind, Rhys told the rest of the Inner Circle, plus Lucien and Nesta, about what happened at the Court of Nightmares. But yes, I agree that I think he only shared the first part of the conversation and omitted Eris's full download, including what he had to say about Lucien. Knowing Rhys, he wants to give Eris the choice to tell Lucien the truth about how he helped him escape the Spring Court. Rhys doesn't feel like it's his place to share that, like he feels in other similar situations too.
I feel like Lucien deserved to know if Eris announced it to the entire council chamber, but that's just me. Moore continues in this moment to be absolutely livid with Rhys. At their circumstances, yes, but it's more about how Rhys does not seem to show an ounce of remorse or empathy towards her as he explains his reasoning. And I'm going to give Rhys an L in this stretch because in the beginning of this conversation, he is not being empathetic. He is not being kind to Moore. He's just saying, like, our hands were tied. Like, I took precautions. And it's kind of not the Rhys we know. And I'm not giving him an L for what he necessarily did because it was a loose situation and he had to make the best of it. It's specifically how he's handling it with Moore, which this lack of empathy causes Moore to absolutely erupt. Ooh, quote, if Amarantha were alive, if she were alive and I offered to work with her, even if it was to save us all, how would you feel? And now I'm going to give L to Moore because, yes, I get that she's angry. I get that she feels betrayed, but this is the opposite of any kind of productive communication. Not that they're trying for that right now. They're in a fight, their family, yada, yada. But Rhys lies to her and says that if Amarantha showed up and gave them a slim chance of survival, he would thank the Cauldron. This is not true because later he will admit to Feyre that is the last thing he would do. He would actually murder her on sight. My guess is that he's lying to Moore in this moment to show, like, look, I can rise above this, so can you. I personally don't think that's fair from Rhys. It's honestly just L's all around. Even if this is a huge blow from Moore to bring up Amarantha, I think that him having just fucked her sideways, she deserved the truth in that moment.
Well, in the heat of the moment while he's laser focused on saving the world, I think Rhys might actually mean what he says about willing to work with Amarantha. But after that moment passes, he realizes that he would never truly do that. And it's when he processes what he would actually do that he recognizes just how much he messed up with Moore. And that's kind of when he really says, I made a bad call.
Okay.
But this is also a big moment where Rhys reveals what Amarantha made him do for all those years. The way the room flinches, and Feyre is thinking how they've never come this close to talking about what happened to him. We talked about this a lot in the last book, but Rhys needed his mate for his own healing, to talk through the difficulties because he couldn't with the others as much as she needed to with him.
Seeing that this conversation is pushing this crew far too far, Amren speaks up and drops the accurate slap in the face. Quote, I kept this unit from breaking for 49 years, and I'm not going to let you rip it to shreds now. She's talking to Rhys. We never learn how bad things were on a day-to-day basis for the Inner Circle during those 49 years with Amarantha taking Rhys under the mountain. But from this one sentence, we can get as clear of an image as humanly possible.
I can absolutely imagine how she kept this Inner Circle together from falling apart during those years. The way she reassures Moore that working with Kier and Eris is not forgiving them, and she will not allow Kier to poison the city, said with so much truth that Moore seems to believe her, and it causes a shift, eases the tension in the room, so to speak. She also gives Rhys the perfect talking to, treating the High Lord of the Night Court like a child who misbehaved. Quote, you're a sneaky bastard. You always have been, and likely always will be, but it doesn't excuse you, boy, from not warning us, warning her, not where those two monsters are involved. Yes, you made the right call, played it well, but you also played it badly. Gold star for Amren.
She's not wrong. This is such a beautiful example of gray area. You made the right call, but you played it badly. It really shows the imperfections of our characters in this story. And yes, while we are giving more L's in this situation, they are not perfect characters, and that's why we love them.
And their feelings are valid, and their choices are valid.
Yes.
Even if it doesn't, like, it goes right back to Rhys and the Mortal Queens and Valaris.
Exactly.
Like, where I was really upset with him, even though I understood why he did what he did. Yeah.
And this sentence from Amren makes Rhys finally say, with shame, that he is officially sorry to Moore. There's one notable person who's been keeping rather quiet during this scene, and that is Feyre. During the meeting, when Eris walks in and they start to share their, plan, Fae-vorite talks to Rhys mind to mind. And at first he does not answer her, even though she talks to him several times. This is wild that he does not respond to Fae-vorite, his high lady, especially after, the one throne showing just a moment ago, showcasing how much of equals they are and how highly he holds her in that regard. It rubs me the wrong way that he did not tell the high lady of the Night Court, who is his equal, that, oh, hey, we have this huge new gigantic development in getting allies to bend to our will. Everything with Eris should have been told to her.
I wholeheartedly agree. They even had like that intimate moment beforehand where she was sharing her feelings about Lucien and whatnot. And he could have definitely mentioned, hey, by the way, we got some news here.
He also was like, I'm in a palace meeting right now. And it's like, you could have said like, I'm in a palace meeting to discuss some stuff that you and I need to talk about later.
Yes. We love Rhys, and he does not always walk the talk.
No. I do think that this feels simultaneously out of and in character for Rhys. I do think that part of the reasoning behind this character choice was for shock factor and for, like plot twists for us as readers, which I'm fine with. Like, I enjoy that.
It could have still been done in a way that SJM does with some of her other female main characters, who we readers don't get to know what happens, but she is still informed of it.
Well, and sometimes people are like, well, we're in a first person POV, so that's not how it works, yada, yada. But like, we've had that with Fae-vorite multiple times. And the High Lady drop is a great example of that. So I agree. I think that this could have been done with her knowing about this beforehand, because her not knowing, it feels very disrespectful for her status as High Lady. No wonder she's having such a hard time figuring out what the fuck her role is.
And I will say, we do kind of defend Rhys and how he does not share certain information with the group, because it is in his character of that self-sacrificing nature where he wants to put the burden on himself. This is not that same situation. No. This is tactical. This is strategic. This is war plans that Azriel also knows about. So this is not the same as that same self-sacrificing nature that he always puts himself in.
Agreed. Back in Velaris, though, Fae-vorite stays quiet as more reels on Rhys until Fae-vorite does eventually, I'll say, side with Rhys, or at least like speaks up as Rhys's partner later on in that scene. We haven't touched on this a whole lot on this podcast, but boy, oh boy, buckle up for Silver Flames, because we're about to talk about it a lot. Fae-vorite is an unreliable narrator because of how much rose-colored glasses she has on with Rhys, with him being her mate. It makes sense. In the council chamber, all he needed to do was look her way and say, I took precautions, for her to trust that he made the right call. Rhys's threshold for actually making Fae-vorite truly mad in this book is, in my opinion, wild. Absolutely wild. Unlike last book, where they got into several fights. Even in last episode, she snapped at him, but their awkwardness was more because she thought that she undermined him rather than they were actually arguing in true anger. Whereas with the Inner Circle, they're getting mad at each other more than ever in this book. Now, this could be because they're newly mated, they're newly married, and, they just have much bigger bullshit to worry about than actually getting mad at each other. This also could be a literary choice, because there is so much tension with the Inner Circle. We need that unconditional trust with Fae-vorite and Rhys, so like knowing that they're a partnership. But knowing Fae-vorite last book and how she put Rhys in his place more times when she was not his High Lady than in this book when she is his High Lady, this just feels out of character for Fae-vorite to just be like, okay, you took precautions, everything's fine. When Fae-vorite does finally speak up later, it is her stepping into some High Lady shoes. And by stepping, I mean, she's like kind of soberly drunk girl stumbling in these shoes, like a little bit, because
she's like my daughter when she puts everybody else's shoes on and she just walks around and she's like got super small shoes. She's super young and she's trying to fill these really big shoes.
God, I love that little girl. She's so cute. Because in this moment, Fae-vorite says, quote, "You all have been to war and back when I've never set foot on a battlefield. But I have to imagine that we will not last long if ... if we cleave apart from within." She even admits in her head that these are almost incoherent words, which she's not wrong. She's trying. And I got to give her props to that. Like, she's trying.
Right.
And it's stumbling. She's new at this.
It is, I'll say, a little bit naive. But that's also the point of it. It's another reminder of how young she is. And she knows it, but she's also trying to be the voice of reason in the midst of this tension and high stakes. When Fae-vorite mentions the Ouroboros mirror, Amren is like, hold up. Why the hell do you want that? And Rhys says, if honesty is the theme of the night, because the Bone Carver requested it. Which leads us into Amren's fascinating backstory about how she got out of the prison, since our crew wants to get the Bone Carver out too, and she says that's impossible. Before she's willing to breathe a word about her escape from the prison, Rhys has to put up a shield around them to block out the sound. Amren is taking absolutely no risks. Quote, because the stone beneath this house has ears. The wind has ears, all of it listening. And if it reports back, they will remember, Rhysand, that they have not caught me, and I will not let them put me in that black pit again.
Which the wind has ears language, it's not far off from how the Bone Carver mentioned he heard of Nesta through the whispering wind in his ear. So Amren's worries are honestly super valid here is what I'm learning. But also before Amren starts talking, Rhys, not requesting, but telling Amren that they need to hear her backstory. She starts to fight back and tells Rhys to, quote, call off your dog. Because in the background, Azriel is moving behind Amren with Truth Teller in his hand. Like, holy shit. I know that they need to be careful. Like, Amren can, be a little scary. But was Azriel really prepping to murder Amren if needed?
I thought this too. Like, wow, this could escalate really quickly. And it makes me wonder what has happened in the past that makes them this on edge, like they know very well what might happen. Because it's happened before. We know that Cassian has been banished from the house before because it was Amren's, fault in the first place, and Amren have more gotten into it in the past. But this is some next level stuff.
Azriel was prepping to kill Amren if needed. That is wild.
So with the sound shield up and the Shadow Daddy dog called off, let's walk through Amren's tale. In the simplest terms, she had to give herself up. She had to become something else entirely, something the prison would not recognize. So she bound herself to this Fae mortal body. Sure, the Fae consider themselves immortal, but that only means that they have long, long, long lives, because ultimately they're mortal. They can grow old and die, unlike what Amren was before. As her previous self, Amren did not feel the way Fae do. Sure, she felt loyalty and wrath and curiosity, but not the full spectrum, like love or regret or sadness or pain. She was a messenger and a soldier assassin for a wrathful god who ruled a young world. Okay, according to some, she was perfect. And yet, because she was different than the other messengers of her world, Amren wound up here in this world. She was too curious, too questioning, so instead of running like her siblings when the rip in the sky opened up, she went through it, driven by curiosity. Quote, upon the order of our ruler, we had just laid waste to twin cities, smote them wholly into rubble on the plain, and yet they fled from that rip in the world. But I wanted to look. I wanted. I was not built or bred to feel such selfish things as want. I'd seen what happened to those of my kind who strayed, who learned to place their needs first, who developed feeling. But I went through the tear in the sky, and here I am. Holy moly! As I'm saying all of this, I'm wondering if those who she's thinking of who placed their needs first, who went through, if she's referring to the Bone Carver and his siblings who similarly went through a rip in the sky. Yeah, you're nodding your head like crazy. Also, the ruler could it have been the Daglin in another universe?
Secondly, I have to highlight that whole laying waste to twin cities. Quote, smote them wholly into rubble on the plain. This is a reference to Genesis 13:12 and Genesis 19:29, Sodom and Gomorrah, aka 2 of the 5 cities of the plain.
But back to how Amren escaped the prison. She was willing to yield her perfect immortality because she had stopped caring about what she would give up after all that time in the prison. She did not remember sunlight or the wind on her face or rain. She needed out, and she found a way by binding herself to a Fae body and giving up everything that she was. How does her power consolidate into this Fae being, you ask? Well, the answer is we don't really know, and I don't think we're really supposed to, and we will never find out. She is clearly powerful enough to defend Valaris, but she is far diminished than she was in her original form. I think, again, we can just chalk it up to she was a very powerful being, and she was able to put herself into this Fae body because of the magic that she possessed. So with this major download, let's bring it back to the Bone Carver, because Feyre and crew need to break him out of the prison. but apparently the only way to do so is to have him bind himself to a Fae body, which it's unlikely that he's willing to do that. We may think that now. However, once Fae-vorite faces the Ouroboros, the Bone Carver will be willing to be contained in an Illyrian warrior body, so then he will be freed upon Hybern's armies.
However, someone else joins this conversation because having heard something that was notably not our crew having this, download, which is quite ominous, Elaine walks into the living room and we get a full-blown seer moment. Elaine, having heard crying from someone who everyone thinks is dead, but she's not dead, only different and changed as she, Elaine, was. Quote, I saw young hands wither with age. I saw a box of black stone. I saw a feather of fire land on snow and melt it. Elaine continues that it was also angry that something was taken and took something as punishment. Alrighty, let's unpack this. So the person who everyone thinks is dead is Vasa, who, after being sold off by the other mortal queens, is trapped in Koschei's control and is cursed to be a firebird by day and a human at night. The box of black stone, which we will learn is the box that Koschei prizes more than anything, except the girls who he keeps in his control that are very much like Vasa. In Slavic folklore, there is a story of how Koschei the Deathless abducts a princess and the hero, Ivan Sosnovich, learns of Koschei's one weakness, an egg in a box that is hidden under a mountain. So Ivan Sosnovich digs up the whole mountain, smashes the egg box, and rescues the princess. Shouts to one of our Instagram followers from Russia who says that Koschei is like Amryn to them, the person in the bedtime stories who scares children into behaving. Shouts to you, Diana. Did I do like 30 minutes of research to see if there's any characteristics that would match Ivan Sosnovich to Azriel or Lucian, with Elaine in this instance being this princess. It's under Koschei's control. Yes, I did. I found nothing except for this dude's name means son of a pine tree, which to be honest sounds more like a cuss word than it does anything that ties into our story. So I'm going to
I would think that the princess would be Vasa if we're doing a one-to-one comparison.
I guess it definitely could be Vasa. I think I just took it to be Elaine in a future book. Maybe she gets in with Koschei somehow. I don't think she's going to be like one of his controlled minions by any means, but I don't know. It definitely could be Vasa. So then the son of a pine tree, which is awesome.
All I think is Will Ferrell as son of a nutcracker.
I just think of in the middle of a day and like something goes wrong and I'm just like, son of a pine tree. Or like when your kids are starting to really copy language and stuff like that. And me, a potty mouth, needs to be mindful around them. So I'm going to start saying son of a pine tree. Anyway, if I had to guess one of the two, I would assume son of a pine tree would be Lucian. Pine, autumn, court. I don't really know. I think that's honestly a bit of a stretch. But anyway, honestly, I need to pull myself out of this rabbit hole because I was down this for a long time. Let's go back to the seer moment because there's another person that Elaine is talking about. Brialyn, the queen who went into the cauldron right after Nesta. And because Nesta took something from the cauldron took something from Brialyn as punishment. That something is Brialyn's youth. So the quote, I saw young hands wither with age, that is the queen, Brialyn. However, Feyre and Nesta, with no clue or context about what Elaine is spouting off, they think her to be mad. Nesta even thinking that it's her punishment watching Elaine lose her mind in this new world. But there's one person who does not see Elaine's ramblings as cuckoo banana pants. No, Azriel asks her questions about what she sees and hears, which is what makes her finally open up more about the vision. Well done, Azriel. And when Elaine finally goes back upstairs, Azriel winnows away without a word. I don't remember if we ever learn where he goes, but my guess is he's going to figure out if there's truth to what she's saying, specifically around like Brialyn, since they have no idea Vasa's firebird status. That would be just so off their radar. But then Moore watches the space where Azriel had once been standing for a long time after he winnows away. Moore is already starting to feel like she's losing Cassian to Nesta. Again, not in a romantic way per se, but it's more because Cassian's always been her buffer between her and Azriel for many years, and suddenly his priorities are shifting to another female. She's starting to see that in Azriel now too, just ever so slightly. And I imagine she's feeling like she's getting I'll call it left behind in the process. Like, when you're like, I know when I was in like my early 20s and like some of my friends were like, going to pair off with their partners, I was like, man. And I kind of felt left behind, not at their fault by any means, but like left behind in life almost, I'll call it.
Yeah. Later that night, after Farah cries herself to sleep, Rhys admits that he's not okay. Like Amren said, he played a bad situation well, but he also handled it poorly with Mor and the rest of the Inner Circle. He may have taken the precautions to ensure no business in Valaris will be open to Kyr and the Court of Nightmares. But that's the practical element of this. He had dismissed the emotional side of this and downgraded the impact it would have on Mor when that was the most important part of all of this. He feels like he made a bad call and he should have found another way. This, again, calls back to how he showed Valaris to the mortal queens. But don't worry, Rhys, I will not roast you here. I'll call back to what Cassian said about recruiting the Bone Carver because it absolutely applies to this as well. During times of war, quote, we don't have the luxury of good ideas, only picking between the bad ones. And that's all they can do. That's kind of what this book is about, navigating through bad ideas and trying to hold on to each other as a family through it all. Rhys isn't ready to risk looking into the Ouroboros. Quote, not yet. He knows the time might come where there's no other option except risk losing himself to maybe have a chance of recruiting the Bone Carver, but not yet. And someone else will get there first. Anyway, let's bring Maja into the chat because she's a delight. And I'm not saying that sarcastically. She is absolutely a delight. And one of the oldest high fae Farah has ever seen. This means she's got to be at least a few thousand years old, right? Baron was in his prime as a high lord during the war 500 years ago, and he only seems to be middle-aged. So let's say he's 1,000 years old or so. That makes Maja at the very least like 1,500 years old. Like, you go, Maja. I'm also not including the King of Hybern in this because I feel like he's ancient in a different kind of high fae way. The rules don't apply to him in the same way, but that's a whole other can of worms we're not opening. She's here to check Elaine to see what's going on with her, as Lucian gently suggested. Although his wording is much more understanding, when Farah asks him if he thinks the Cauldron made Elaine insane, he says, quote, I think she went through something terrible. He just wants to help and be respectful from afar. I know we keep saying that, but it's so true. After Maja's examination of Elaine, she explains that she cannot find anything wrong with her. Her body is fine, besides needing food and fresh air, but she cannot enter her mind because she is Cauldron made. I find that fascinating, especially as we think about how those who are Cauldron made are different. And we know that the Daimati can still speak into their minds and show memories to them, as Rhys does with Nesta a few times, and Farah does as well. But it's like entering even deeper levels. And that is where the Cauldron madeness shields that. Where really being able to, like, I'll say, look into their soul, maybe? I don't know exactly.
Well, Nesta later is like, there's no way your mate is going to go in and scramble things around with Elaine. And I do not think that going in and scrambling things around, like trying to heal her in that way, is a good idea. But I'm sorry, Nesta. I'm going to quit qualm with this because I think that, honestly, Rhys and or Farah, they are Daimati. Why not go into Elaine's mind to see what they can do to better help her? Not scramble things around and try to fix her, but see how to help her. Yes, it's kind of a violation, but quite honest, I think it's worth it.
Like, for instance, how she's speaking in riddles, they could literally go into her mind and try to understand any kind of sense of this. Yeah.
Yes, or at least make her feel more heard and seen. Like, I think Nesta being like, that's a terrible idea is
Nesta pretty much thinks everything they say is a terrible idea.
Exactly. It's just a Nesta thing. But if I was Farah or Rhys, I would have been like, fuck off. We're going to do it anyway because this is a great idea.
Maja says something that really speaks to me and I think speaks to a lot of us. Quote, I do not like that word, wrong. Different, perhaps. Changed. She confirms what our crew already knows. Elaine is deeply traumatized. But Maja also acknowledges that she doesn't understand made magic. It is out of her scope because no one besides Elaine and Nesta have ever been made by the Cauldron. Well, there is Brielle and the Mortal Queen, but we're not counting her right now.
Maja does have one remedy that is at least not morally unacceptable. She wonders what Lucian, Elaine's mate, can do. Quote, if anyone can sense something amiss, it is a mate. Turns out that mating bond, that bridge between souls, a lot of good stuff can come from it. And Feyre's like, great idea, Maja, because she has a mate who is acutely attuned to her. But Nesta is not quite convinced, I guess is the nicest way I can say it. And quite frankly, fairly so. She does not understand the mating bond anywhere near to the degree that Feyre and the other Fae do. Despite her being around her mate Cassian literally daily, she does not view it that way. Nesta asks Maja, how would a mate be able to tell? And then Nesta, not so politely, says, call another healer to Feyre. I think Nesta asking, how can a mate tell? Yes, she's definitely asking for Elaine because Elaine is her top priority in figuring out what can help her. But I also do think that there's a small part of Nesta who's asking, like unconsciously, for that, oh shit, like how can a mate tell? What do you mean? Like I might have someone who has that connection with me. I don't think it's conscious. I think it's completely unconscious. But High Lady Feyre is determined to try the Lucian remedy, I'll call it, despite Nesta's protest. So the plan is set. Lucian will sit with Elaine, Nesta will be in a lesson with Amren, and Mor and Feyre will be watching over the two mates on their first date. Quote, Lucian muttered something about not needing to be monitored, and we all looked at him with raised eyebrows. I will never not laugh at this because what in the Bridgerton is this? Like, that is ridiculous. Anyway, but we will talk about that date next episode.
Let's turn our full attention to foreshadowing important moments in this book and the rest of our series.
Feyre asks Cassian who he put in the prison, and he says better left for another time. We will learn in A Court of Silver Flames that one of the inmates he put here is Lanthus, right before he dies. The Bone Carver's fear of his siblings will be overcome because later in the book he will fight alongside Striga on the battlefield. Sadly, though, her scream will be what turns the Carver's attention to the Cauldron's power right before it rips him to shreds on the battlefield.
Nesta and Feyre's conversation about training with Cassian and how Nesta doesn't want to learn how to fight. Quote, why bother when someone else can do it for me? The entire plot of Silver Flames foreshadowing aside, Nesta will end up being the one to kill the King of Hybern, and she didn't even need Cassian's training. Yet.
Lucian thinks in regards to Nesta's future partner / mate, quote, Cauldron helped the male who wound up shackled to her. Shackled is a very interesting word because that is the exact word that Cassian uses in their scene walking in Valaris when he says, quote, in Silver Flames, well, I didn't have a choice being shackled to you either. Ooh, can't wait.
And all hell breaks loose. Yep.
Cassian sharing how training always helps him focus and center himself, to which Feyre shares that there are definitely worse methods of coping. Humans, I give you the entire plot of the beginning of Silver Flames.
Helion sends the first response about attending the High Lord meeting, which isn't a surprise given how close they wind up being. And Thesan sends the second one, saying he won't do it unless it's in a truly neutral and safe location. Well, they end up having the meeting at his home in the Dawn Court. And lastly, Kallias is the third High Lord to reply, who wants to bring armed guards. He currently thinks Rhys was involved in the murder of all those Winter Court children because it was a Damati who did it. So naturally, he wants to bring protection against the Night Court.
Do you think he'd bring one of the ice monsters or the bear or the messenger fox?
Definitely
Probably
the big scary bears. I love
Definitely the bear. Alrighty, friends, it is time to sip some tea with the Suriel. Every episode, Lexi sips some tea with the Suriel and walks us through a world topic that helps us better understand this world and the people in it. And buckle up because she spent so long on this one, and everyone give her some extra love this week.
Today's Suriel topic is the Old Gods. The Old Gods are deities who ruled before Prythian became a kingdom. This is all long ago, far more than 15,000 years ago, in times before the Mother and the Cauldron and Prythian. Like I mentioned earlier in the episode, we do get that inconsistent history lessons about the early days of this world, and quite frankly, I have tried so hard to make sense of it and find the answer, but the more I look, the more conflicting histories I uncover, so we're just going to move on. The Old Gods are also known as death gods because they can feed on life itself thanks to the magnitude of their powers. They achieve this in various ways, but on a grand level, like say on a battlefield, they literally suck the life force out of their enemies, turning them into mummified husks. And they are true immortals. The Fae have very long lives, but these gods are actually immortal from other dimensions. But they can still be killed from powerful forces like the Cauldron or Cauldron-made weapons, or apparently their neck getting snapped by the King of Hybern, which I have some questions about. But anyway, as I'm talking about these old gods / death gods, I will specifically be referring to 3 who we learn the most about. However, it is my understanding that there were more old gods than these 3, like Lanthus, for instance. They originated from a different dimension and fell into this world. The ancient Fae worshipped these old gods, mainly because they feared them. 2 of these old gods, Koshte and Striga, loved the attention and basked in the Fae's devotion, but their brother, the Bone Carver, did not enjoy this attention so much. Speaking of Koshte, Striga, and the Bone Carver, let's talk more about these specific old gods. They are extremely powerful siblings whose origins are steeped in legend even among the Fae. They cross the dimensions of another world, falling into this one of their own free will. Because of how powerful they were by this world's standards, I just love that little note showing how vast this universe is. They were identified as gods by the ancient Fae and worshipped by them until the Bone Carver hid from his siblings in the territory that would become the prison, and an ancient Fae female trapped Koshte and Striga in confined spaces in the world. They may be contained and diminished, but their influence and power in this world remains considerable. Okay, now time to summarize each of these 3 death god siblings. First, we have Koshte. He is the oldest brother of the 3 siblings. An ancient female Fae warrior confined and bound Koshte in a lake on the continent. Nowadays, he's regarded as a powerful sorcerer who likes to imprison women, like Vasa, the 6th queen. He is the sorcerer that the mortal queens gave Vasa to because she disagreed with them about allying with Hybern. He cursed Vasa, so she is currently bound to his lake and turns into a firebird by day and a woman by night. To give you an idea of how powerful he is, the spell he cast on Vasa is woven into her very blood, and not even Helion Spellcleaver has a chance of breaking it. Then we have Striga, better known as the Weaver. She is the Bone Carver's twin and younger sister to Koshte. Like I mentioned, she reveled in the Fae worshipping her as a god and used the deaths of the others to keep her body young by feasting on their life forces. It's not outright said, but I think we can imply this means there were living sacrifices to her. The Weaver, or Striga, being young and beautiful and just basking in it, loved her mirrors. She had a black castle, and one of her favorite mirrors was the Ouroboros. Before imprisoning Koshte, this female Fae warrior put an end to Striga's reign of terror. She tricked Striga into diminishing her power and becoming confined to the middle, where she is now bound to a small cottage in the middle of an ancient forest. She is at the top of the food chain in the middle. From then on, Striga became known as the Weaver in the Wood, and she is unable to leave her bit of land of her own free will, imprisoned with only herself for company. High Lords are not allowed to interfere with her, and they do not try to retrieve their treasures that she hoards, thanks to the laws that protect her and her wrath. How do the High Lord's treasures find their way to her cottage in the first place? I genuinely don't know, except for Reese's mom, who willingly gave her the future wedding ring as a test for her son's future mate, but I think that's an exception to the rule. Bottom line, her cottage is described as a junk shop of some immortal hoarder. Because she cannot feast on life the way she used to, she is now both young looking in her body, and yet her face is hollowed out, shriveled up from the lack of enough feeding on life. She is now blind, and like the Bone Carver, senses that Thera is made differently, like all but unlike all. As her way of continuing to feed off life forces, she weaves life into fabric. Using soft yarn that was somehow previously a life force, she weaves on her loom people's life forces. I don't have any idea how that works, but she does make it happen. And of course, there's the Bone Carver. The Bone Carver was the least magically powerful of the 3 siblings, and he feared them. Driven by this fear of his siblings, he took it upon himself to be put in the prison before his siblings were contained, so he could hide from them. Well, technically, when he went to the prison, it wasn't the prison as we know it yet, so either we have an inconsistency in the timeline, or he went to the territory that would become the prison. He is particularly interested in death. His fascination with death further alludes to him being a death god, even if he doesn't personally consider himself one. He appears differently to each person he meets, apparently however he chooses to appear, but I do believe it's connected to death in some way or another. That is not confirmed, though. That is only a theory. He carves the door of every inmate in the prison. He seems to have the foresight of the future, carving deaths into the bones brought by others in exchange for the knowledge he possesses. And that, friends, is our Suriel Teatime on the old gods.
You know what I just realized is the bone carver in ACOWAR says about like the bone that he gets from the Midgard worm. He says like, I will carve your death in here, Feyre. She died in Silver Flames, giving birth to Nyx, the boy he looks like.
Yes.
Is that really obvious? And I'm just
No, it's not, because that is really consistent evidence to him appearing as someone associated with your death.
Yeah.
However, why did Rhys see Jurian?
I don't know. Maybe because Jurian was resurrected by the Cauldron and made and unmade, Rhys gives his life to give back into the Cauldron. That's a stretch, though. I think.
Yes, but at least it's some kind of possibility. Good thinking.
I like it. All right, let's move into favorite moments. Cassian calling Rhys a mother hen is just, it's just delicious. And Cassian, that is just the start of it, because man, does he get worse in Silver Flames.
Rhys making light of the bone carver's counter offer. Quote, if he wants the fancy dinner plates, he can have them. And then, like, of course, like Cassian and Feyre are like, no, this is not a funny moment.
Cassian getting all pissy because he drew the short stick and has to stay back in Valaris. I do think one of the reasons he gets so pissy, though, is because he will not be with Nesta on her first Court of Nightmares visit. A, to see how she fares, B, to make sure that she's all right in this room full of vipers. And C, to see the look on the Court of Nightmares people's faces when she rips them a new booty hole. Like, that would just be delicious. All of Feyre's winnowing to the House of Wind and trying to fly in and then just eating it on the ground. And I love the first time she does it, she looks around and like makes sure no one watched. It's perfect.
Rhys saying, quote, only Nesta would not just conquer death, but pillage it. 10 out of 10 line, no notes, can't wait to talk more about her powers.
Nesta referring to Moore as the blonde one who won't shut up. Nesta also telling Rhys that he was flying deliberately slow, so he goes fast and then makes her vomit when they get to the townhouse. And then Cassian, of course, laments up to the ceiling how she'll never fly again.
Which, by the way, he's probably like, he sees a future with them flying and all that. And he's like, God damn it, Rhys.
Yeah.
Anyway, Rhys just loves to poke the bear. He would fit right in with my in-laws. They find something to get under your skin and they just poke really hard. And the more
Lovingly.
jokes. Yeah.
Lovingly.
Except because the more jokes and pranks that are targeted at you, like the harder they poke, it means the more they like you.
Absolutely. 100%. I love your in-laws. Oh my God, they're amazing. Rhys asking Cassian if really 9 swords are needed to protect Valaris while they're away at the Court of Nightmares. And he, quote, merely told me that it didn't hurt to be prepared. And if I had enough time to question him, then I should have enough time to do another workout. I left quickly, throwing a vulgar gesture his way.
Fun fact, the phrase vulgar jester is used 17 times in the series. And I feel like most of them are in ACOWAR.
Absolutely.
17 times.
That's insane. So do you see vulgar gesture as just like flipping them the bird, or do you see it as like something else entirely?
I think it is actually showing the middle finger, because there is one phrase where they do specifically say that. So
You're right.
Yes.
Yep.
The way Nesta sees her sister in her High Lady of the Night Court badass element in the Court of Nightmares, she has to drop to her knees when everyone else does. And when her sister shows off her powers and her Slytherin side, Nesta is just staring at her like she's never seen her before.
Accurate. Cassian having Nesta stand behind him when Amryn is about to share her story, and Nesta just peeks over his shoulder. Like, I see that so vividly.
Me too.
And I am quoting this entire moment because this is just perfection from Feyre's inner monologue. And this is about Cassian. Quote, I didn't think the others gave him enough credit for noticing the shift in someone's emotional current. To command legions, I supposed, he needed to be able to read that sort of thing, judge when his soldiers or enemies were strong or breaking or broken. Oh, yes, agree.
Yes,
you don't give him enough credit.
Agree. Emotional intelligence extraordinaire.
Feyre thinking that she can keep out of Moore and Azriel's business. First of all, that is a first. But then 40 minutes later, guess what she does? Yep, it's butt into their business. Well done, Feyre. You tried. All right, friends, we are about to begin the longest Maasverse Madness that we've done in a while. Buckle up.
All right, friends, we are about to begin our Maasverse Madness segment for today's episode. Today's Maasverse Madness includes spoilers for the Throne of Glass and Crescent City series. So if you have not read all of the Maasverse, this is where we part ways. But before you go, reminder that next episode we will be covering ACOWAR chapters 29 through 34. We are also so excited to share that as part of the Inner Circle Patreon tier, we give you a big shout out for joining, and typically it is your name on the very first episode after you join. And we had so many people join that this is only like the first people who joined within like literally an hour of us starting it. We are going to be doing the second half of our first day joins next week. But anyway, for today, let's kick it off with Sammy, Chase, Hannah D, Marissa, Jessica, Haley, Mona, Hannah M, Kim, Billy Berry Blue, and Nicole.
Well, we're not done. We've got Shannon S, Aaron M, Marta S, Kelly, Brittany M, Kendra V, Stephanie S, Molly R, Orzel, and Tanya.
And still going here with PJ, Tracy, Kelly B, Emma, Katie B, another Samantha C, Caitlin, Elizabeth, Kelly K, Jenny, Mallory, and Christina.
And we're still not done. Do you see why we had to put this into so many episodes?
I love it.
I do too. We literally had to order more supplies because you all, for your welcome gifts. So you all are amazing. Katie S, Corey K, Carolina L, Malik, Michelle, Anna K, Ivana, another Samantha C. They're multiplying. Melissa W, Jen K, and last but not least, Marie Christine.
Thank you so much. Oh my goodness, we love you so much. And if you're like, hey, I want my name read on an episode too, be sure to join the Patreon party.
We also have so many events like we mentioned at the top of the episode. All of them are listed in the show notes, including our first official solo FFG live show here in Denver, Colorado on October 20th.
And if you want all the updates, all the extra content, you know where to go. Give us a follow at Fantasy Fangirls Pod on Instagram and TikTok.
Last but not least, you know the drill. Rate and review the podcast. It takes 2 seconds, and it's one of the best things you can do for any and all podcasts you love.
All right. We are now officially entering our Maasverse Madness segment of the episode. Nicole's literally stretching as she prepares for this.
Yeah, honestly.
Where we call out series crossover references and discuss theories. Today, we are rolling up our sleeves and talking about the entire Maasverse. So please only continue listening if you've read all of Throne of Glass and the Crescent City series. All right, let's continue our discussion about the old gods. Are the old gods connected to the Daglan, who we know are the Asteri and maybe the Volg? I know that's a little bit questionable there. The Daglan would drink magic like fine wine, like I mentioned earlier, and the Asteri require first light during the drop. So that would equate to them feeding off life forces like these death gods.
There's also the Asteri having the second light from people who are in the Bone Quarter and like move on, basically. So they have first light and second light.
And that could equate to them feeding off life forces in a similar fashion as these death gods. There are also different levels of Volg. So I wonder if the Asteri are, I'll call it the most powerful Volg or an evolved version of the Volg, and the old gods are more like their minions, kind of like the lesser levels of the Volg there. I don't know if that makes any sense, but...
No, it does. It does. And I love the idea of them, the Asteri and the Daglan, being evolved versions of the Volg, which we'll get into the supporting evidence for that in a second. But when you say like the old gods are almost like their minions, I imagine them, the old gods, being much more powerful than like a Volg prince, for instance, assuming that they are Volg or even Volg adjacent. I will say this, it is very sus because Kostje has a black box that is like super precious, like my precious to him. Is this some kind of Volg black ring, black collar situation, but just in box form that he has? Potentially.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Well, let's get into some of our supporting evidence about how the old gods are connected to the Daglan and the Asteri and possibly the Volg. Lanthus and the Weaver bleed black blood. There. The Volg and the Asteri have black blood too. Remember that the one Asteri who was killed in the prison, she bleeds black blood. So the fact that Lanthus and the Weaver also do, I feel like that means that it's a dead giveaway that they are all connected.
Which, side note, I thought of this earlier and I couldn't say it. When Nesta kills Vesperus in the prison in Crescent City 3, we mentioned earlier how Nesta is almost like a amalgamation of Gwydion, like a Gwydion-esque sword, like the power of the Cauldron and the power of an old god. She puts her power into Ataraxia, which then kills Vesperus. So there's another instance of Nesta having the power of the Cauldron to be able to kill the Asteri, Daglin, / maybe Vogue.
Yes, because she is almost like the bridge between the Cauldron and creating these weapons, because she has that same Cauldron power essence that then she transmits into these made objects. Exactly. Another point, again, talking about Lanthus, is that he looks a lot like Erewhon when he was conjured in a human form. Not saying they're the same individual whatsoever, but I gotta love these similar appearances that they can form into.
We should note, not when he was Parrington, but when he's like Erewhon 2.0.
Yes, exactly.
Definitely
like
not
the blonde man. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And another point, the Bone Carver wants the Ouroboros mirror, and that had belonged to his sister, the Weaver. Maeve told Aelin that her kind had taught witches to use mirrors. So there's another possible connection.
Well, and I 100% believe that the Ouroboros is some kind of witch mirror. From the Tog Wiki, quote, "Witch mirrors are mirrors with immense power that have various uses depending on the type of mirror in question." Sounds about right. Now, there is that moment where the Bone Carver is like, my sister was once a queen. Could he be referring to a Vogue queen? Right?
Ah.
Now, would that be Maeve or someone else? I don't think it would be
it's
Maeve.
The exact same characters. I think that as we talk about the multiverse, there aren't so many of the exact same characters as the same types of characters and such.
Agreed.
Let's continue another discussion about who the ancient Fae female warrior is. The Bone Carver describes her as, quote, "Clever, that Fae warrior. Her bloodline is long gone now, though a trace still runs through some human line. No one remembers her name, but I do. She would have been my salvation had I not made my choice long before she walked this earth." So we already speculated in today's ACOWAR coverage who this warrior was, but I'm going to build on it being Thea, who is Fion's queen. Her name is never said in ACOWAR, so here we are saying it here. It's Thea. She was one of the High Fae who defeated the Daglin. Now, I will say part of the Bone Carver's description doesn't fit for her because he says no one remembers her and her bloodline definitely continues through the High Lord of the Night Court.
I do wonder if he's referring to how the bloodline maybe at one point split, and he's referring to the split half of the bloodline that went to the human side. So if at one point it did split and go to the human side, I do have something to build off of that, though, is because in Celine's download, she mentions Thea, quote, "being blessed by the gods themselves." If I texted this to you and I was like, holy shit, like I freaked out. If the bloodline is like, let's say, for instance, through the Archerons, this would be a huge clue to their power boosters, that I'll say. But also this means that Rhys, as a descendant of Thea, who was blessed by the gods themselves, would also, you know, explain why he is super powerful. I'm just saying, coincidence? I don't think so. Yes, I do think that with this meaning all of them stem from Thea, that does mean that Rhys and Feyre are distantly related. If Rowan and Aelin can do it, so can fucking Rhys and Feyre. I don't, like, it's distant enough. It's fine.
Well, and according to the timeline we have, it couldn't be Celine either, although she was the one who rounded up the Daglin's pets and trapped them in the prison. Technically, Amren went to the prison before it was actually a prison, since she went in before High King Fion's reign when the Dust Court flourished, which is what the prison used to be. And we know that the Bone Carver went into the prison before Amren. So technically, the Bone Carver and Amren were in the prison, not yet a prison, before Fion was defeated, before Thea took her people to Midgard, and before Celine came back to a Prythian with High Lords, and she proceeded to trap the monsters and create the prison.
We need a timeline, a visual timeline. I feel like this is crazy.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that there are inconsistencies in the timeline. Like, I would love to create one, but I think I would actually go crazy because there are these inconsistencies here. Anyway, okay, there's also speculation that this ancient Fae female warrior was Aelin.
Which I love this theory. However, I don't think they're talking about Aelin because they mention how she was on this world. So I definitely do think they're talking about Thea. Now, he is saying that the ancient female warrior's bloodline is running through a human line. While not technically human, he could be referring to Lydia in Midgard. And Aylin's bloodline is running through her, but she's technically a shifter. So I don't know if that might be a bit of a stretch. Another Crescent City option for this human bloodline, though, is actually, if this is not the Archeron, this is my number 2 theory. If the human,
I do think that it is Archeron, and I don't think it is somebody that we actually know. But come on, we got to theorize.
Oh, you don't think it's someone we actually? I think it's Thea, and then the Archerons.
Oh, but how nobody remembers her bloodline?
He said how nobody remembers her bloodline, but I do.
Correct. And Thea's bloodline goes through the High Lords.
But I think he's referring to the split bloodline where it splits into the humans.
Okay, that's actually a really good point.
Now, here's just to throw a new wrench in it, like taking the Archerons completely off the board. Could he be referring to Bryce's mother's human bloodline, the Quinlan bloodline? Since we know that Rune got his starborn Fae-ness from his mother, not the Autumn King, that would have to mean that Bryce got starborn powers through Ember. If Thea is indeed this Fae warrior, that would mean that the Quinlan bloodline could be the distant Fae,
yes,
running through it.
Yes.
Or hell, it could be both, which means that it would be Feyre, Archeron, Elaine, Nesta, and Bryce all being distantly related to the Starborn Fae bloodline.
Which would make total sense because of the 8-pointed star. Oh my God, yes, I have chills. I think we just figured it out. Like, okay, that's canon to me now. Yep.
All right, let's go into the Bone Carver, because there's many a theory wondering if he is not Nyx, who this Bone Carver could possibly be with the crushing blue eyes and the raven black hair. And there are people wondering if this could be Rune or Dorian. I'm going to talk about Rune because that seems to be the more popular one, especially since Bryce mentions at the end of Crescent City 2 how when Rhys walks in, she's like, oh my God, it's Rune. And then she realizes it's not Rune. I love this idea. I think it would be so cool if we've actually been seeing Rune this entire time. However, Feyre sees her own mouth or her father's mouth in the boy. So unless there's like a wild plot twist where Feyre is like, where time is being warped and Rune is actually Feyre and Rhys's son, I think we can confidently say that it is not Rune. Please do not make it Rune. That would hurt my head so badly. I love it. I love the idea. But if Feyre and Rhys are actually Rune's parents, that would be wild, considering Rune's like 84. Anyway, so if we're looking at the Bone Carver as a whole, I want to back up a little bit because Sarah Kane Reeds has an incredible video on TikTok, and we'll link it in the show notes. This theory was brought about because the Bone Carver has some different motives than his 2 out for blood siblings. In Sarah's video, she notes how with each interaction with him, our crew has to offer up a bone, and then they get to ask him all the questions they want, except for sometimes. But there's one rule. Never lie to the Bone Carver. In each interaction, they will share basically a truth for a truth, unless you're Feyre and Rhys and ACOWAR and you're still owed 2 more truths. It's fine. I'm clearly over it. What if the Bone Carver is actually a god of truth, aka the Sin Eater from Throne of Glass? As Sarah Kane Reeds points out on TikTok, in Queen of Shadows, the Sin Eater's temple is filled with bones of confessions written on them. We know that the Sin Eater was a godlike being. So is this the Bone Carver, or are they similar in some way? Again, not saying that they're the same person, but they're almost adjacent titles. But Sarah adds to this theory because the Bone Carver explains that his home world is no more than a dust drifting across a plain. Then he draws 3 interlocking circles in the dirt. And if you're like, that sounds familiar, it's because it is the same design as the Archesian amulet that Bryce gets from Jessica. So in House of Sky and Breath, Apollyon, aka the Prince of the Pit, takes Bryce in a dream to a, quote, vast dusty plain, which is exactly how the Bone Carver describes his home world. But Apollyon takes her to not what he calls the home world, he calls it Parthos, or at least what remains of Parthos, which, yes, that is where Jessica took all of the books from before it fell, which in Parthos, the Archesian amulets, those 3 interlocking circles, are what the priestesses wore. It is described exactly the same as how the Bone Carver draws on the floor. So is the Bone Carver's homeworld Parthos? Now, I do want to point out that if this ancient Fae warrior's bloodline is indeed the Quinlan bloodline, the Bone Carver is literally drawing Bryce's necklace as he talks about this Fae warrior's bloodline running through humans. So this could be a massive hint towards it being Bryce.
Wow. I can't keep all of this stuff straight. Wow.
When I tell you I had 16 books opened up on my laptop last night, this is why. Now, we do know for a fact that this is not the same thing as the Eye of Elena. There's very similar descriptions, but it is different because the Eye of Elena is described as 2 circles within a bigger circle, whereas these are 3 intertwined separate circles, almost like a 3-circle version of the Olympic sign.
And
that makes sense?
Yes, and it's the Eye of Elena symbol, the one of 2 circles within a larger circle. That is the same as Manon and their witch symbols. So yes, they are very slightly different. Okay, yep.
So maybe like these 3 circles, like this Arcasian amulet symbol is like an evolved version of the Eye of Elena, possibly, if Tog is in a past timeline, but we're not touching that right now because we have way too much. Let's talk about Thanatos, because oh my God, I have been waiting to talk about this since we started ACOWAR. As Kier is leaving the council chamber, he says, quote, Lord Thanatos is having difficulties with his daughter again. He requires my assistance. And then he leaves. I'm screaming because I was on TikTok one day and I saw a video by Shannon Taylor. Yes, we will link it in the show notes, because Thanatos probably sounds mighty familiar, since he is the Prince of the Ravine, aka one of the princes of hell in Crescent City. He also, in Greek mythology, is known as the personification of death and is the son of Nyx, the goddess of night. But who is his daughter, you ask? Her name is Enris. Okay, things are looking fine so far. But until you look up, what does Enris mean? Are you ready for this, Lexi?
I'm ready.
Enris means fury. Fury! We know from House of Sky and Breath that Danica used her bloodhound tracing powers on Fury to learn what Fury's lineage was, and it was big hush hush. They like had a secret on each other, yada yada yada. Is Fury the daughter of the Prince of the 4th level of hell? And Sarah J. Maas just happened to drop it in a different series? For reference, ACOWAR came out in May 2017, and CC1 came out in March 2020. But she started writing CC1 in 2018. So it would have been very close. I am convinced that Fury is the Prince of the Ravine's daughter.
Now, to be clear, though, when they're talking about this Lord in the Court of Nightmares, it is not, or it is that same Prince of Hell.
It is Lord Thanatos, which is the same name as the Prince of the Ravine it's Thanatos in Crescent City. It is the exact same name.
But are you saying that it's the exact same person, or it's a hint to it?
If they have the same name, I would have to say same person. Now, how does Kier have access to the 4th level of hell? I don't know, but maybe.
It's crazy.
Now, this also would mean if Thanatos is indeed Fury's father, that means that Thanatos had is kind of a stretch, but created, I'll say, both Fury and Hunt, which
That's
means
right,
they're kind of
Hunt's
siblings
father.
in some way.
Oh, man.
This is brilliant if this is actually accurate. Like, I'm stunned. All right, I have one more Maasverse Madness thing. Because in the scene with the Bone Carver, he mentions multiple times wind and its connections to Nesta. He says, quote, how the wind moans her name, and, quote, I can smell the wind on you, talking to Cassian. Could this be a witch clue for the Archeron family? I know we spent a whole long time going through how they're Fae descendants and the descendant of the Fae warrior and yada yada. So we're just going to, again, put that off to the side for a moment and wonder if this is actually a clue for the Mama Archeron being connected to witches. Because in Throne of Glass, witches are often called to the wind. There's so many mentions of Tog, witches, and wind. So could this be a hint, especially since Nesta several times jokes about being a witch with the Illyrians, and that scares the shit out of him. The more and more we do these kinds of theories, the more I think SJM actually might have put like multiple Easter eggs in, and then she could just decide later which bloodline she wants to go down. But I mean, it could be both. Maybe the Fae line is actually through Papa Archeron. And again, that's how he has access to Adriata and Valaris. And then maybe the witch bloodline is actually through Mama Archeron. I don't know, but it made my head go scratch.
Oh my gosh.
We're done. We need to be done.
Okay. I think it's time that we wrap this episode up. That was fantastic. Good job, Nicole.
Thank you very much.
Our next episode is covering chapters 29 through 34 of ACOWAR, and hopefully it's a little bit easier than today.
It will be. I've already read it, and I was like, oh, wow. Thank you, as always, to our executive producer, Hayden, a.k.a. our sanity manager, especially this week when we actually lost our minds. We adore you. Thank you. And, of course, everyone, please share this episode with your fellow ACOWAR friends. If you and your friends don't understand a lick about this old god situation, you can let Lexi do your thinking for you. Go ahead and hit that share button.
Thank you so much, everyone. We will see you next week.
Bye.
When Feyre mentions the Ouroboros Miro, Amren is like, hold up.
Wait, hold on. Will you say mirror one more time? I think it was Ouroboros mirror.
That's the one thing about like listening to our episodes sometimes where it's like, oh, I don't like how that word sounded, but you know what? There's nothing we can do about it.
Quote, who did you put here? The mossy earth cushioned my steps. Why did I quote all of this?